Chapter 506. I'll say it again. You can't do it. Nanchu looked like a little child at the moment. He looked a bit adorable when he wagged his finger, but the eerie smile on his pale face made him look rather dreadful. However, it's said that you're the strongest swordsman in Chaotian. I'll give you a chance to challenge me. I'll say it again. You'll die. Lu Xi went on with a faint smile. I'm the sect master of Aoyama, so I'm invincible. Nanchu couldn't help but laugh. How can you kill me when your grandmaster, master and senior masters couldn't even do it? I'll kill you with my sword, of course, said Lu Xi. But you don't even have a sword, said Nanchu sympathetically while looking at him. Upon hearing this, the cultivation practitioners of various sects burst into an uproar. It wasn't until that day that the cultivation practitioners of Chaotian learned about it. The swords came out of Aoyama, and the immortal Lu Xi, as the sect master of Aoyama, didn't have a sword of his own? It was true that Lu Xi had no choice but to lack a sword. Back when he returned to Aoyama from the Zhongzhou school, he had no choice but to travel slowly in the sky by stepping on the sword cloud. This was also the reason why he didn't have a sword. The following fight is not a true contest. It's my instruction to you. Looking at Lu Xi, Nanchu said with a warm expression in his eyes, How can you achieve the path without a sword? I'm the only one who can solve this problem. Be my disciple, and I'll spare your life. To be able to instruct the sect master of Aoyama on the sword work was a perfect scene for Nanchu, who was determined to surpass the Aoyama sect for the rest of his life. Nanchu was fully aware that Lu Xi wouldn't agree to this request, but he would teach him in a more direct way. At the same time, he would let all the cultivation practitioners in the world know who was the #1 swordsman. Lu Xi had already walked out of the sword formation of 6 stars and arrived in the sky. Nanchu's figure disappeared abruptly. In the next moment, he arrived in front of Lu Xi along with countless sword lights. He didn't wield his sword, because the child of the sword ghost was a sword himself. Lu Xi did not draw his sword, because he did not have a sword. He stretched out his broad palm, bringing with it the countless sword wills of the world, which formed a square diagram. Whoosh! The hundreds of Aoyama flying swords that hovered in the sky like raindrops began to tremble, while the real raindrops instantly turned into powder and disappeared without a trace. Nanchu was drifting gently in the sky. It was hard to tell if his figure was real or fake. He looked like both a ghost and a ferryman. Suddenly, a splash appeared on the surface of the sea. Lu Xi rose up on his sword cloud and floated toward the sky again. His whole body was drenched, and his clothes were torn all over. Faint traces of blood could be seen. The sect master of Aoyama was considered the strongest swordsman in all of Chaotian, but he was slashed so badly by a swing of the sword. Seeing this, all the cultivators were shocked speechless. In the beginning, some people thought that Nanchu's sword ghost method was formidable, and that he might not be able to defeat the immortal Lu Xi, but they had finally realized that the great grandmaster of the Foggy Island was indeed the great grandmaster of the Foggy Island. Seeing Lu Xi fly back from the surface of the sea, Nanchu's expression was full of complicated emotions. It was the happiness of having his wish fulfilled, but it was also the emptiness of being invincible. Back then, Dao Yuan thought I had a murderous nature, so he didn't want to take me as his disciple. I wasn't convinced, so I found the manor house left by the ferryman of the previous generation overseas and developed a new idea. In the end, I had surpassed him in the sword work. He thought that he could use the sword formation of Aoyama to cut down my Dao tree and seize my first child's sword in order to destroy my sword work. But is it possible? Nanchu went on sentimentally. I've cultivated diligently on the Foggy Island for hundreds of years, and I've finally mastered the most perfect sword work. By using the sword ghost as a human and the human as a sword, I've become invincible in the world. Lu Xi said after wiping off the blood on his beard with his sleeve. Sneak attacking and surpassing are two different concepts. Upon hearing this, Nanchu grew angry and said sternly, "No matter what, I've won. I've proven that my sword work is far superior to your Aoyama's sword work." 1,000 years ago, that youth from the south wanted to become the personal disciple of the sect master of Aoyama, the immortal Daoyuan, but he was refused. What he wanted to do most in his long cultivation life was to destroy Aoyama, to prove to everybody, including the deceased immortal Daoyuan, that people could still cultivate the ultimate sword work even without Aoyama, and even surpass Aoyama. Back when Shi Huang's son took Lu Shisui as his personal disciple, what the godly swordsman of West Ocean had done over the years was to prove it. In the end, it was that youth who had accomplished his goal. "You've been defeated by me today, and Aoyama will keep losing until it's destroyed. I've already seen that day." Nanchu looked at Lu Xi, his eyes exuding a cold and blazing glow. "The downfall of Aoyama will start from now on." Buqiuxiao said that the individual cultivation practitioners were of little significance in the war in the cultivation circle, unless they were figures in the heavenly arrival state. Nanchu was such a person. The godly swordsman of West Ocean stood in the sky behind Nanchu like a statue. The prowess of this pair of master and disciple could only be compared to the immortal Jingyang and Tai Pingzhenren in the last 1,000 years. If either Lu Xi or Yuan Qijing died at the West Ocean, the Aoyama sect would have no choice but to seal off their mountains like the No Mercy sect had done. As far as the Aoyama sect was concerned, the best solution was for Lu Xi to return to the sword formation of 6 stars and wait for the sword formation of Aoyama to fall and kill Nanchu. However, doing so would be tantamount to admitting that the sword work of Aoyama was inferior to that of the Foggy Island. The Aoyama sect rarely had the option of admitting defeat, not to mention that their opponent was the Foggy Island that day. Lu Xi said to Nanchu, "Your proof is not enough." This meant that they would fight again. Nobody thought Lu Xi would win, including his allies like Ozawa and the Platonist sect. The immortal Lu Xi had always been considered the strongest swordsman in Chaotian, but the great grandmaster of the Foggy Island, Nanchu, was simply too powerful. Cultivation was about the passage of time. Nanchu had a high generation and a profound cultivation state, and he was the strongest swordsman in the world back then. Now, he had created a new method of sword ghost, and he was a fairy man. The most dreadful part was that Nanchu came here to seek his own death. When a fairy swordsman decided to risk his life and become a ghost, nobody could defeat him. When he decided to use his own life in exchange for the defeat of the Aoyama sect, nobody could stop him. If Lu Xi were defeated by his sword, what would the Aoyama sect do? Zhao Leo thought that she would stay behind closed doors for 100 years after returning to Aoyama. Lu Shisui thought that he had to study hard in Yamatsui and try to break through the heavenly arrival state as soon as possible, then he would return to Aoyama and rebuild his sect. Zhuoruzhui thought to himself, "Damn it." As Lu Xi was killing Nanchu on the ocean, Jingjiu was also killing Nanchu in the ruined temple on the barren mountain. He grabbed Nanchu's hand and exerted a bit of force. More sword lights came out from the point of contact between their hands, slicing the broken ruins into smaller particles. The ground of the barren mountain cracked open, and countless deep cracks appeared on the ground, where the underground spring could be vaguely seen. The sky opened up, and the sword of the universe pierced toward Nanchu's head in a straight line. Pa! Nanchu reached out his left hand and grabbed the tip of the sword of the universe. The sword of the universe was as clean as a dustless object, but it seemed to be alive at the moment, vibrating incessantly, in an attempt to cut off Nanchu's hand. "It's a good sword," Nanchu praised. As he uttered these 2 words, the sharp claws of the white cat had already reached his right eye. Nanchu closed his eyes and used his eyelids to block this strike. Crack! A withered willow tree on the cliff a few miles away was broken into 2 halves. An endless energy came out from the skinny old man's body. He lifted up Jingju's body and smashed it toward Nan Wang, who had just arrived in front of him. Boom! Nan Wang was knocked backward and smashed into the field a few miles away, sending up a great deal of sand and pebbles. The entrance of a cave could be vaguely seen amid the smoke and dust. Nanchu couldn't shake off Jingju's hand, so he used Jingju as a weapon and slammed Nan Wang into the deep end of the cliff. The white cat let out an eerie and dreadful shriek. He leaped down from Jingju's shoulder and grabbed Nanchu's head, scratching it with all his might. If a regular house cat scratched it, it would at most leave a thin red line on the head, but he was the master white ghost, the principal guard of Aoyama. Each of his claws was as powerful as a sword in the heavenly arrival. The bright lights and the dreadful sword wills were everywhere on the barren mountain. The cliff collapsed and the smoke and dusts rose up. Nan Wang's angry voice rang out outside the smoke and dusts, F***ck your ancestors. She leaped up while holding the zither sword with both of her hands, and slashed it down toward Nan Chu's head. Nan Chu's countenance was expressionless as he swung Jingju at the zither sword. Boom! Nan Wang was sent flying backward again, and half of the stony mountain collapsed from the impact. He couldn't get up from the ground. The white cat was still attacking madly amid the smoke and dusts, looking like a flash of formidable white light. The dreadful meowing could be heard incessantly, as if the cat was calling for sex. Nanchu grunted and swung Jingju at the cat. His attacks were like a rainstorm, and he had swung hundreds of times in a few seconds. With a dreadful meowing, the white cat was hit by Jingju and fell into the wild grass. I didn't expect you, an old devil, to have attained the path toward heaven in the end. Is it possible that the sword work will eventually lead to the unification of sword and human? Lu Ci's voice rang out in the sky again. There was no fear in his voice, nor was there any coldness before a fight. There was only calmness and confidence in his voice. He said to Nan Chu sympathetically, "It's a pity that you're not the first person to walk on this path." Creating a new sword work was like discovering the principle of heaven and earth. The first person to achieve it was of course the most important. The cultivation practitioners of various sects were startled, but they didn't quite believe it. They thought that the immortal Lu Ci intended to disturb the mind of the great grandmaster of the Foggy Island. Though they couldn't understand Nan Chu's sword ghost method, they were fully aware that such a formidable sword work was not a secret method of any sect. Only a talented swordsman like Nan Chu could create such a sword work hundreds of years after his Dao tree was destroyed. His first child sword was stolen, and he was trapped on the Foggy Island. With such a condition, it was impossible to find another person in all of Chaotian, to say nothing of the Aoyama sect. Hearing what Lu Ci said, Nan Chu was startled, but he soon calmed down, saying, "It's impossible. I'm the only one who can create such a brilliant sword work." Back when his Dao tree was destroyed by the immortal Daoyuan using the sword work of Aoyama, and his first child sword was stolen, his cultivation state stagnated. As a result, he had no choice but to resort to a risky method. He transformed his body into a sword, and then he used the sword pill to invade his body and gave all of his spiritual soul to the sword ghost. Your sword work is indeed unique. You used the soul-capturing method of the southern barbaric tribes to refine the sword ghost, and then used the dark fire of the Foggy Island to refine your body into a sword. The combination of these two methods is indeed brilliant. Hearing what Lu Ci said, the expression on Nan Chu's face grew more and more unsightly, because it was evident that Lu Ci knew something about his sword work. However, Aoyama has known this method a long time ago. It was quiet at the West Ocean, except for the ripples and Lu Ci's voice. There's one more thing I want to clarify. Lu Ci went on, in fact, I have a sword. The sheath of the inherited heaven sword appeared in front of him. Nan Chu said with narrowed eyes, "This is the sheath of the sword." Everybody could tell that. A sheath is needed only if you have a sword. This is a simple principle. Please, Lucy, I said. He looked at Nan Chu. Yet, he said this please to somebody else. He held the sheath of the inherited heaven sword with his left hand and grabbed something in the air with his right hand, pulling it out slowly. No sword came out from nowhere. Yet, the whole heaven and earth heard a sword sound. The barren mountain had collapsed, and the ruined temple was gone. The wild grass had turned into frost, and the wild dust had died down. Countless white marks appeared on Nan Chu's face and neck, looking rather dreadful, but he was not severely wounded. In the wild grass, the white cat licked his paw, which was stained red with blood. It was unclear how many of his nails were broken. Jingjiu was in the worst condition. His face was pale, and blood seeped out from every pore on his body, making him look like a bloody man. A great deal of his sword source had been consumed as well. Half of the white cat's teeth were broken, and the blood was dripping down from the corners of his mouth. He didn't bite Nan Chu again, but stared at Jingjiu with a complicated expression in his eyes. He didn't say anything, but everybody could see the imploring intent in his eyes, as if he was begging Jingjiu to agree to something. It was unclear what he wanted Jingjiu to agree to at such a critical moment. Could it be that he could reverse the situation by agreeing to it? Unexpectedly, Jingjiu didn't pay any attention to him. Instead, he posed a few serious questions to Nan Chu. The red lantern has been destroyed, and the sword ghost can't return to this body. Which one of you is the real you? If I kill this you, will the surviving you still be you? Will the other you still be yourself? When they were fighting to the death, it was strange to suddenly discuss such a question. Yet, Nan Chu gave the answer, and it was obvious that he had given it some serious thought. The surviving me is me. Jingjiu fell silent for a while before saying, "What you said makes sense." A sword sound could be heard in the distance. It was an invitation. Please come back. If it were before, he wouldn't accept it no matter how many people were killed in front of him. But he changed his mind today. It was because he wanted to compete with Nan Chu to see who was the strongest swordsman in the sword work. Aoyama was still the foggy island. I'm still you. As such, he accepted Lucy's invitation. Then, he drifted up. End of this chapter. Chapter 507. The clouds and fog had dispersed, and the sunlight shone on Aoyama. Every peak could be seen clearly. Shangda Peak felt warmer. The dead dog didn't squint his eyes anymore. He lifted his head to look at the sunlight, the expression in his eyes rather warm. In the deep part of the sword jail, Marshal Uncle Tai Lu's shout turned into an almost inaudible murmur. One, is it? Is it one? In the lonely cell, the snow girl squatted on the bamboo chair, sensing the change of energy in heaven and earth. After a moment of silence, she uttered a faint moan. The sunlight on Tianguang Peak was still the brightest, but the hole on the stone monument grew deeper and gloomier. The round turtle under the stone monument opened his eyes slowly. The expression in his eyes was deep and gloomy, very much like that hole. Looking at the hole on the stone monument, Fang Jingtian remarked sentimentally, "Master, you're right." On top of the once run-down temple, Jingjiu's feet left the ground, drifting in the air. Back in the fiend prison, he had learned the underworld fairy sword with the help of the king of the underworld. As a result, he became much lighter and cleaner than regular cultivation practitioners. It was because the impure energy in his body had been tempered by the soul fire, so he was drifting in the air. Yet, when he drifted in the air, it was different from usual. It felt more like a non-human, like a flag in the wind or a sail on the ocean. It was because he was still holding Nan Chu's hand that his body drifted up horizontally in midair. His right hand aimed at Nan Chu's body. His right hand was wounded severely by Monk Duhai in the Guoqing Temple. Later, he searched for whetstones all over Chaotian, and it took him 1 year to heal his right hand. His right hand had recovered completely, and it was sharper than before. He was quite familiar with this posture. He had always flown like this, no matter whether he was at the bottom of the cold mountain or when he dug a hole in the ground. It was for the purpose of sharpening his sword, and to get used to it in advance. Perhaps he had already anticipated this day at the time. Seeing Jingjiu drifting in the air, Nan Chu's eyes displayed a strong sense of wariness. Yet it was too late. Before the thought came to his mind, Jingjiu had already flown away. Whoosh! Jingjiu disappeared from the original spot, nowhere to be found. Nanchu lowered his head to look at his own body, and found a large hole there. Inside the cave was a stretch of nothingness. Just like the round window in the meditation room of the 3000 nunnery, one could see spring, summer, autumn, and winter, everything in the world. Nanchu vaguely understood something. The white cat squatted in the grass and stared at him, its eyes filled with sympathy and cruelty. Nan Wang flew out of the cave and was about to continue fighting when he suddenly realized that his opponent had become like this. He was so stunned that he even forgot to curse. Jingjiu was flying. He had never flown so fast before, whether it was when he was riding a sword, or when he was using the Netherworld fairy sword, whether it was in his previous life or this life. All the images on the ground turned into lines of various colors that quickly moved backward. He vaguely felt that even the thoughtless sword swimming was not as fast as he was now. This was not an accurate calculation or judgment, because he had already entered a state where he was neither an object nor himself. His Tao heart was clear yet chaotic. Strangely enough, he could see the reality of heaven and earth through those colorful lines in such a state. The green lines should be the green fields, and the red lines should be the walls of the Baodong Zen Temple and the hot pot in Izhou City. The occasional white specks might be the Yuanyang hot pot, which was rarely seen in Izhou City. Then, he saw a patch of blue. It was blue everywhere. The ocean and the sky were the same color. The West Ocean and the blue sky were the same color. Standing between the sky and the ocean, Lu Ci held the sheath of the inherited heaven sword with his left hand and pulled out the invisible sword with his right hand. After the sword sound rang out, it didn't stop. It gave off a seemingly endless sound of friction. It was unclear whether it was being sheathed or unsheathed. Countless sword wills in heaven and earth gathered toward him, and his right hand was the center. His figure looked extremely tall in the light, like a god, or a giant who intended to slay a god with his sword. Nan Chu's body suddenly grew fainter. The godly swordsman of West Ocean lifted his head abruptly and pointed his finger forward. The sword of the 12-story building was called back. Along with the crisp cracking sounds, it broke into 12 pieces. The broken pieces of the sword surrounded Nan Chu's body like a broken pagoda, forming an exceedingly strong barrier. Lu Ci's sword fell down. It was windless in the sky, which looked like a piece of frozen ice. The surface of the ocean was also very calm, like a gloomy ancient mirror. Yet, the absolute quietness gave off a strong feeling of being torn apart. It seemed that the sky and the ocean would drift apart. As the sword fell down, heaven and earth seemed to be on the verge of being split apart. Everybody could sense it, but they didn't have enough time to react. In other words, they didn't dare to react. Hundreds of flying swords of Aoyama lowered their heads slightly, indicating their submission. The lone sword was the only exception, as if it wanted to express something. Bai Jinren spun his head abruptly and looked toward the south, a strange expression showing on his face. Bu Qiuxiao sensed the fear from the dragon-tail inkstone, raising his eyebrows slightly. What kind of sword was it? As soon as the sword light appeared on the horizon, Nan Chu had made his move. He disappeared from the original spot. 5 puffs of smoke and dust seemed to appear in the blue sky at the same time, and each puff of smoke and dust was a few miles away from each other. In the blink of an eye, he had arrived at a very high place in the sky. Yet, he didn't dare take this sword head-on, fleeing instead. A moment ago, the sword light was still on the horizon. In the next moment, the sword light arrived at the West Ocean. The surface of the ocean was illuminated, as if the morning sun had risen again. The energy of the sword was quite ordinary. It was neither desolate nor desolate, devoid of lethal intent, and devoid of any other energy, as if it were a flying sword that could be seen everywhere. It was extremely simple. Only the likes of Nan Chu and Bai Junren could discover that this simplicity was actually the indifference after the complexity had been achieved. This was the so-called returning to the simplicity and returning to the simplicity. The sword light passed through the spot where Nan Chu had been, and kept moving forward. The godly swordsman of West Ocean stood in the sky. He had already adjusted his energy to the peak, and headed toward the sword light without hesitation. Countless huge tides occurred on the surface of the ocean, and then everything returned to normal. The sword light didn't stop there, and flew over. Pa! The 12 sections of the heavy building sword were all broken into pieces. The godly swordsman of West Ocean spat out a mouthful of fresh blood. He fell down toward the surface of the ocean while facing the sky. A figure in the upper state of the heavenly arrival state had been wounded severely by a sword. The target of the sword light was not the godly swordsman, it was merely passing by. Witnessing the scene, the people were shocked speechless. Even Bai Junren felt a chill in his bones. The sword light didn't stop after knocking the godly swordsman of West Ocean away. In fact, it didn't slow down at all, it kept moving forward. The sky was illuminated by the sword light. The disciples of the Western Sea Sword School fell into the ocean in tandem. Many of them were killed or wounded in an instant. The sword light suddenly entered the ocean, and then flew up again, disappearing from the eyes of the people, heading toward the high sky. A moment later, a deep and painful whimper could be heard in the deep part of the ocean. The huge dark shadow was disintegrating slowly. The ocean water was gradually dyed red. Nan Chu had already fled to the high sky. The sword light chased after him. Countless gazes were fixed in that direction. A few moments later, innumerable marks appeared in the sky. Nan Chu was in the front, and the sword light was behind. The speed displayed by Nan Chu was beyond the imagination of the cultivation practitioners. Yet, he still couldn't get rid of this sword. The marks grew fainter and fainter. It meant that Nan Chu and the sword light were getting farther and farther away from the ground, until they couldn't be seen anymore. Yet, nobody pulled back their gazes. They were still looking up at the sky. After a long while, it suddenly rained from the sky. The people knew that Nan Chu was dead. In the barren mountain, Nan Chu looked at the surrounding fields. The ruined temple, the black coffin, and those rocks had all turned into the tiniest powder. It was the result of his and Jingjiu's swords. The flowers, the trees, the cliff rocks, and the water vapor were all mixed together and couldn't be separated anymore. Nan Chu finally understood the principle. Was this the all-in-one? He thought of it in silence and then closed his eyes. On the West Ocean, Jingjiu and Nan Chu stood 100 feet apart in the empty realm. Apart from the grudges between Aoyama and the Foggy Island, they were the two swordsmen who were the closest in terms of sword work in the history of Chaotian. They had a conversation through spiritual awareness in the last moments of their lives. "Are you still you now?" asked Jingjiu. Nan Chu's pale face showed a hint of bewilderment as he replied, "Of course I am me." "Who is he then?" asked Jingjiu. "He is him," said Nan Chu. "That's reasonable," said Jingjiu. "Who are you then?" asked Nan Chu. "The all-in-one?" "I'm Jingyang," replied Jingjiu. Nan Chu understood what Jingjiu meant. He said sentimentally while looking at Jingjiu, "What a marvelous sword, and what a marvelous man." There was a sword in Aoyama that he had always wanted to see but didn't dare see. There was also a person he had always wanted to see but didn't dare see. Now that he had seen Nan Chu, it was time for him to go back. His body dissipated into countless light specks, dispersing in all directions. Even the figures in the heavenly arrival state could do so, not to mention that he was a sword ghost to begin with. Jingjiu's line of sight followed those light specks downward. Those light specks passed through the empty realm and turned into water drops after being stained by the water vapor, which then fell down like raindrops. The raindrops landed on the surface of the ocean, but they didn't create any wave. The surface of the ocean that had been stained red by the whale's blood was as tranquil as ever. The event that had happened 1,000 years ago had come to an end. Seeing this, Jingjiu felt sentimental as he remarked, "The wind is calm for a lifetime, and the waves will remain calm for 1,000 years." He forgot that this was the empty realm, devoid of air and sound. It was deathly quiet in heaven and earth. The game of the West Ocean sword has gone on for more than half. I've written a detailed outline for this part. I calculated it the day before and found that it has more than 60,000 words, including the revisions. Fortunately, the final result is what I wanted. I hope everybody will like it. Chapter 508. The empty realm was windless and soundless. It was as quiet as a graveyard. In the higher sky there were countless thunderstorms. It seemed that they would fall at any time, but it also seemed that they would never fall. They looked like the eyes of purple, red, and blue monsters, staring at everything below. Jingjiu looked at his right hand and every part of his body at the same time, confirming that he had undergone some very subtle, or perhaps mysterious, changes. He accepted Lu Si's invitation in the ruined temple on the barren mountain and became the sword that he used to kill Nan Chu and Jian Shilai. As far as he was concerned, he had taken the most important step toward that river. He didn't know what would happen in the future. The questions he posed to the two Nan Chu were answered by Nan Chu in the end. Those were not important. He had never doubted himself. The reason why he had refused Lu Si all these years and was unwilling to take this step was because he was worried about something else. Looking at Xiaoming Island on the surface of the sea, Meng Qi guessed that his senior brother should be on that island, judging from the situation of the orthodox sects such as Zhongzhou School and Yamatsai. Did you plan this beforehand? If he really is that ghost, then you may indeed win this war in the end, but will you still have the chance to enjoy it? As he thought of these things, he looked at a certain spot in the sky, only to find that Lu Si was no longer there. Rain was falling from the sky. The rain was not heavy and stopped after a while. Many cultivators' clothes were not wet. Even if a few drops of rain fell on their faces, no one thought of wiping it off, and no one thought of using a Taoist technique to block the rain. Everyone was still in a state of extreme shock brought about by the sword light, so how could they care about such trivial matters? The sword light came down from the horizon and arrived in the blink of an eye. It wounded the godly swordsman of West Ocean severely, killed many in an instant, dismembered the flying whale, and killed Nan Chu in the sky. Heaven and earth were opened, and even ghosts and gods had to stay away. No matter what words were used to describe it, it was not enough. What kind of sword was this? How could such a sword exist in this world? The cultivators thought back to their long life of cultivation, recalled the ancient books in the mountain gate, and found that there had never been such a powerful sword. This was probably the most powerful sword in the history of Chaotian. Countless gazes followed the rain back to the arena and landed on perfected Lu Si. Those eyes were filled with awe. That sword was too terrifying, and the person who could unleash it was naturally even more terrifying. Many people recalled what the immortal Lu Si had said to Nan Chu not long ago. "I am the sect master of Aoyama, of course I am invincible." Yes. With the sword in his hand, Lu Si was the strongest swordsman in Chaotian. Even the strongest expert in the world would have to consume a great deal of spirit and sword energy to unleash such a strike. Lu Si glanced in the direction of Xiaoming Island and suddenly raised his eyebrows. The wind was blowing. Dark clouds covered the sky. The sword of 12-story building was not the most powerful sword in the world, But the godly swordsman of West Ocean was close to being the most powerful swordsman in the world. When he was taken away from the foggy island in the South Sea by Tian Jinren, he was still a teenager. Without a teacher or a sect, he only relied on a few sword books to reach the pinnacle of swordsmanship in just 200 years and founded the Western Sea Sword School. Such a person was certainly outstanding. Under the tremendous pressure from the Aoyama sect, the Western Sea Sword School had survived until today. How many people in the world could do that? Unfortunately, the Taoist name he gave himself was a sword from the West, but he was still no match for a sword that came from beyond the sky. Fortunately, the swordsmen of the Aoyama sect were still in the sword formation of 6 stars at the time, so they had no choice but to watch him return to the fallen immortal island after being severely wounded. This was the main island of the Western Sea Sword School, far away from Xiaoming Island. Even if the formation of the mountain gate was destroyed, the defense here would be able to hold on for a while. On the cliff on the east side of the island facing the ocean, there was a huge hole about 1,000 feet wide and 100 feet high. It looked like a huge window, through which the rain and wind of the sea could be seen. A white line appeared on the surface of the ocean, and the godly swordsman of West Ocean landed in the window. Turning around, he saw the raindrops falling from the sky, knowing that his master was dead. Now that he thought about it, his master was called the godly swordsman of the South Sea. The name of the fallen immortal island was indeed not good, and he should have changed it back then. The godly swordsman of West Ocean's face was a bit pale, but his expression didn't change. "Is this your scheme?" he asked. A few years ago, the young mysterious Dark Master contacted him through Su Zai, intending to cooperate with him to kill Taiping Jinren. He wasn't good at scheming, and he was aware that such a simple scheme had no chance of succeeding. As such, he got the Zhongzhou school involved in the scheme through Su Zai. According to his original plan, his goal was to kill Taiping Jinren, and then kill that devil in Aoyama together with his master. In order to trick Taiping Jinren into the scheme, he had even sacrificed Tian Jinren's life. Now that his master was dead and the West Ocean was on the verge of being destroyed, the Zhongzhou school hadn't done anything yet. It was obvious what the problem was. No matter how formidable the Aoyama sect's attack on the West Ocean Islands was, and no matter how violent the storm was in the outside world, Su Zai had been staying on the fallen immortal island. He was the former young master of the mysterious dark sect and the most talented young man in the deviant sects, but he couldn't cause any trouble in this war. Stirring up trouble was something he had already done before the war started. He had another reason to stay on the fallen immortal island. He knew that the godly swordsman of West Ocean would come back and ask him this question. "Yes," Su Zai continued calmly, "all I wanted to do was to kill you. After this event is over, the Zhongzhou school will help the mysterious dark sect find a spiritual source." The godly swordsman of West Ocean reached out his hand and grabbed Su Zai's neck even though he was a few feet away from him. A sword will shot out from between Su Zai's eyebrows and hit the chest of the godly swordsman of West Ocean. The body of the godly swordsman of West Ocean swayed slightly, and his injury worsened. His Tao tree was on the verge of collapsing. Even if he could escape today, he wouldn't be able to cure his injury without practicing diligently for 100 years, and he had no hope of climbing to the top level of the sword work. This sword will was very powerful, formidable, and it had a familiar feeling to him. He remembered that it was Pei Baifa's sword. He thought of Chao Xiaoshu. Back then, Pei Baifa had infused this sword will and the remaining Jin Yuan into Su Zai's body. It wasn't until now that the power of this sword had finally manifested. Su Zai had waited patiently on the West Ocean Islands for this very moment. All the godly swordsman of West Ocean needed to do was to activate his will, and Su Zai's head would fall off. Su Zai was waiting for death calmly. Many years ago, he chopped off Pei Baifa's head with his own hands and saw Tong Lu's head floating in the ocean. From that moment on, he had never feared death. It was odd that the godly swordsman of West Ocean didn't kill him. The Zhongzhou school has allowed you to have a spiritual source. It looks like something will happen to Aoyama. The godly swordsman of West Ocean pulled back his hand expressionlessly, turned around and walked into the deep end of the cave. Nan Chu was dead, and the godly swordsman of West Ocean had escaped. The disciples of the Western Sea Sword School had suffered a great number of casualties. The last sword light had crushed all the will to resist. Yet, the battle was not over yet, because Taipingzhenren hadn't been caught yet. Xiaoming Island was sealed in ice, and the dragon-tail inkstone had been suppressing it all along. No matter how capable Taipingzhenren was, he couldn't escape undetected. A sword boat of Aoyama landed on Xiaoming Island. Guangyuan Zhenren and dozens of disciples of Aoyama were about to land on the island. The swordsmen of the orthodox sects, like the cloud boat of the Zhongzhou school, the boat of diligent study of Yamatsai, and the Guoqing Temple and the Kunlun sect were watching the scene from midair. A section of the Black Mountain had been cut off by the godly swordsmen of West Ocean, exposing the smooth and flat stone cliff and the complicated tunnel hidden in it. In the deepest part of the stone room, the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect stood behind Yin San. Looking at the young man before him, Yin San didn't say anything, his eyes full of curiosity and bewilderment. It had nothing to do with him, no matter how fierce the fight outside was. The West Ocean was doomed anyway. Nan Chu would die by that sword, and that wicked disciple should know what he would do next. All he needed to do now was get the first child sword and leave. Nan Chu's method that day and the sword light coming from the horizon had inspired him. In all of Chaotian, only Nan Chu and that sword could inspire him. After he left the West Ocean with the first child sword, he would try to change the body of the sword. Once he succeeded, he would go to Aoyama and start all over again. A few decades later, after the death of that wicked disciple, he would become the sect master of Aoyama again. He would hold the sheath of the inherited heaven sword in his hand and use that sword to sweep across all of Chaotian, completing his great undertaking. It was a perfect plan. Unfortunately, before the perfect start, he encountered a problem that he did not expect. There was another young man in the room where the first child sword was kept. That person was covered in dust, but his face looked delicate and tender, though the expression in his eyes was rather nonchalant. Yin San thought this young man was very similar to himself, and so was Su Zai. It was a wonderful thing that two young men who looked like himself had suddenly appeared in the world, but it was not fun at all. Yin San said with a faint smile, "You're outstanding. Thanks for the compliment, immortal." Tong Yen said calmly. He held the green sky mirror with both of his hands. The green sky mirror was aimed at Yin San. Whoosh! A flash of white light shot out from the green sky mirror. The white light had a faint golden glow, exuding the purest fairy energy, full of destructive intent. The face of the young mysterious dark master was full of fear. Yin San's face was pale under the illumination of the white light. According to the request of the student Huang Agu, the title of this chapter is still the lyrics of the song. End of this chapter. Chapter 509. The world in the green sky mirror had woken up, becoming lively again. Those who had slept for a long time didn't know what had happened. They thought that they had merely slept for a while. The eldest young Master Zhang, who was the only one awake and sleeping, felt uncomfortable about it, but he was aware that he couldn't complain about it. As a result, he moved to a Taoist temple to seek peace and quiet. The juniors of his family and the officials in the county town begged him for many days, but he refused to move back. He woke up one morning and walked to the window, looking down at the bottom of the cliff. He missed the talking carp in the well. Suddenly, his eyelids were burned by the fire. What he saw was not a real fire, but a burning cloud. The morning glow appeared in the sky, many times brighter than usual, as if it contained a great deal of light and heat, ready to erupt at any moment. Seeing this scene, the eldest young Master Zhang felt it rather eerie, feeling alarmed for no reason. Flutter! Flutter! The blue bird flew over from afar and landed on a tree branch by the Taoist temple. Looking at the morning glow, a hint of sadness appeared in his bewildered eyes. It was not the regular morning glow, but the true fairy glow. The fairy glow filling the sky was a sign that the fairy book would come out. The fairy book in the green sky mirror had been taken by Jingjiu a long time ago. Why was there another fairy book? The white light shooting out from the green sky mirror came from that fairy book. Only the Zhongzhou school had the fairy book in the world. In addition to the fairy awareness, the fairy book also contained a great deal of fairy energy. In order to temper that fairy book, Jingjiu had listened to the scripts in the Guoqing temple for a few years, and he had almost had a mishap. Guodong was still in a deep sleep after the fairy energy poured into her body. Yet, all the fairy energy in the fairy book had been released in an instant. It was easy to imagine how powerful it would be. Illuminated by the fairy light, Insan's face grew paler and paler, almost turning transparent. His hands turned transparent as well. It was unclear if his body under the cloth was the same. The strong wind whistled in the stone room, passing through the bone flute, making a whimpering sound that sounded like the wailing of ghosts. With a soft hum, the celestial light landed on his body. His clothes were torn into pieces, fluttering like butterflies, and then turned into nothingness. Insan didn't disappear like a butterfly. He was still standing in the same place. It was unknown what kind of divine art he used, but the immortal light actually passed through his body. The celestial light landed on the wall of the stone chamber, instantly burning and corroding a large hole. Then, a trace of power leaked out. With a loud bang, the stone chamber collapsed, and the rocks above were lifted off, revealing the sky covered in dark clouds. Cultivators of various sects surrounded the Xiaoming Island, watching the Aoyama sword boat that was about to land with various emotions. The flattened mountain on Xiaoming Island suddenly exploded. A beam of immortal light soared into the sky. Countless gravel and gales howled in all directions. The sword boat of Aoyama was the first to bear the brunt of the impact. Many cracks appeared on it instantly. Guangyuan Jinren wielded his sword and brought the disciples of Aoyama back to the boat. The cloud boat of the Zhongzhou school and the boat of diligent study of Yamatsai quaked violently. The flying sedans of other sects had almost fallen off the boat. They flew to the distance hastily. Countless gazes fell on the collapsed mountain and saw the scene in the dilapidated stone room. The fairy light came from the green sky mirror in Tong Yan's hand. Insan's face was pale. It was evident that he had suffered an irreversible injury. The Thunder Soul would had experienced the thunderbolts on the top of Bihu Peak for a great many years. He was reborn with the help of the Thunder Soul wood and learned the related magic. By employing the method of passing through the thunder, the fairy light had barely passed through his body and prevented all the power of the fairy energy from reaching his body. As a result, he was brushed by the fairy light. Yet, it was the fairy light. Not everybody could withstand it, even if it was merely brushed by the fairy light lightly. Moreover, the fairy book prepared by the Zhongzhou school for him wouldn't be lost so easily. The real lethal attack was yet to come. As the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect was about to take Insan away, he suddenly looked at the sky and screamed strangely. He turned around and fled, arriving a few thousand feet away in an instant. After the fairy light left Xiaoming Island, it didn't dissipate, nor did it grow fainter. Instead, it disappeared into the dense dark clouds in the sky. Above the dark clouds was the empty realm, and above the empty realm was the thunder region. The whirlpools of thunder and lightning looked like countless colorful eyes, watching everything in the human world. The fairy light was like a tinder, igniting the angry flames in those eyes. The dark clouds were rolling restlessly, and countless bolts of lightning flashed in the sky. Along with the booming sounds, countless balls of thunder and fire shot toward the ground, heading toward Xiaoming Island. Countless huge waves formed on the surface of the ocean. The cultivation practitioners of various sects moved away in tandem, their faces full of fear. The power of the thunder and fire was unimaginably powerful, almost as powerful as the heavenly punishment. It was no wonder that the great Grand Master of the mysterious dark sect, a demonic god, was so fearful. Looking at the thunder and fire descending from the sky, San thought he would die soon. Though he had many other tricks up his sleeves, they were useless against this patch of thunder and fire. The fairy light didn't kill him immediately after passing through his body, but it left a mark in his body. No matter where he fled to, this patch of thunder and fire would eventually land on him. It was not like the heavenly punishment. This was the heavenly punishment. The corners of San's mouth curled up slightly, flashing a self-mocking smile. Back when he came back from the underworld, he had made a vow that he would not undergo the heavenly punishment in his life unless the world was at peace. Unexpectedly, it was the heavenly punishment that found him in the end. Was this the so-called heavenly punishment? The situation at the West Ocean had been under his control. As Jingjiu had taken that step, Nanchu would be defeated for sure, and Jingjiu would no longer be a threat to him, and he would become the sword in his hand. By then, he would be able to fulfill all his vow. Unexpectedly, he had come to the last moment. There were so many things he hadn't done yet. He had promised the king of the underworld, promised himself, and how this world could exist forever. He of course was not satisfied with the result. As San was waiting for his death, a tall figure suddenly appeared in front of him. That person raised his palm to block the thunder and fire descending from the sky. Looking at the back of that person, San arched his eyebrows slightly. It was he who had stood in front of that person a few hundred years ago, but it was the other way around now. And since when did that person become taller than him? Countless thunder and fire descended from the sky. A single leaf could cover a large mountain, and a single palm could cover the entire sky, including the thunder and fire in the sky. The scorching rays of light spread out in the sky above Xiaoming Island. The thunder boomed and rumbled incessantly, but none of them landed on the ground. After a long while, the thunder had finally stopped. The dark clouds dispersed, exposing the blue sky. It was unclear where the terrifying thunder and fire had gone, as they didn't leave any trace in heaven and earth. Lu Ci pulled back his palm. He leaped into the sky without turning around to take a look at San. 15 sword boats of Aoyama were scattered in the sky. The disciples of Aoyama on the boats looked at the figure of the immortal sect master, their faces full of worry. The immortal sect master had killed Nanchu, countless disciples of the West Ocean, and the flying whale with a swing of his sword. He looked like a god, but he had collected the heavenly thunder. Would he be all right? It was then that Lu Ci's body suddenly swayed a bit. Hundreds of flying swords of Aoyama had flown toward Xiaoming Island, and they were heading toward Tong Yen. This was a reflexive action of the disciples of Aoyama. The situation was too chaotic. Many people couldn't figure out why Tong Yen of the Center sect was on Xiaoming Island, and what the fairy light was all about. Why did the immortal Lu Ci show up there when the thunder and fire were about to crush Taiping Jinren to death? All the disciples of Aoyama knew was that the fairy light had attracted countless heavenly thunders and wounded their immortal sect master, and the cause of all this was Tong Yen. Seeing the heavenly thunder vanish, the great Grand Master of the mysterious dark sect returned to San's side. He was very close to Tong Yen, so he could kill him at any moment. Hundreds of sword lights arrived, and the great Grand Master of the mysterious dark sect was nearby. It seemed that Tong Yen would die for sure. Even though there were swordsmen like Bai Jinren on the cloud boat of the Zhongzhou school, they wouldn't have enough time to rescue her. Unexpectedly, Tong Yen had suddenly disappeared from the ruins. In the next moment, he appeared on the cloud boat. Nobody sensed that Tong Yen had moved. Even the escape method of heaven and earth couldn't break through the sword formation of the Aoyama sect and come to such a distant place in an instant. What method had he employed? Some cultivation practitioners who had participated in the cultivation tournament in the Snowland that year, or had heard of the story of Lo Huainan, recalled the peculiar treasure of the Zhongzhou school. The seal of 10,000 miles. Many cultivation practitioners had guessed that this was a scheme devised by the Zhongzhou school. But what had Tong Yin done? Were the fairy light and the heavenly thunder the rumored fairy book? You've worked hard over the last few years. Bai Jinren shot a glance at Tong Yin. Tong Yin fell silent. Back when he was attacked by Wang Xiaoming with the sun banner on the cold mountain, he had thought of using the seal of 10,000 miles, but he had refrained from doing so in the end. It had saved his life that day. See Chapter 20 for details. What he didn't expect was that the people of the Aoyama sect intended to kill him without even giving him a chance to speak. What he didn't expect was that when Taiping Jinren was on the verge of being killed, it was the immortal Lu Ci who came forward. Xiaoming Island had turned into ruins. Yin San uttered after shooting a glance at Lu Ci in the sky. It was unclear what emotion he was feeling at the moment. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect came before him hastily and bowed down. Yin San lay on the ground, feeling a bit weak. Crack! A crack appeared on the ground. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect arrived on the icy surface outside Xiaoming Island with Jingjiu on his back. He was Taiping Jinren, whom the whole world wanted to kill. Now that all the orthodox cultivation sects had gathered here, how could he escape? The immortal Lu Ci had taken the fairy book prepared for him by the Zhongzhou school, but what about the others? A crisp whistle burst out in the sky. Bu Qiuxiao, who had been preparing silently for a long time, drove the dragon-tail inkstone and threw it forward. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect knew that this was the most precious treasure of Yamatsai's temple, so he dared not neglect it. He threw his fists at the inkstone along with a wisp of dark smoke. A deep and low dragon roar came out of the dragon-tail inkstone. The light scattered in all directions, dispersing the dark smoke in an instant. Boom! Countless cracks appeared on the icy surface around Xiaoming Island, spreading out like a spider web. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect swayed slightly, but soon steadied himself. He carried Yin San on his back and kept moving forward. The dragon-tail inkstone rose up into the sky and was about to strike down again. Bu Qiuxiao was suddenly alarmed. In the next moment, a cold and brilliant sword light appeared in front of his eyes. Guangyuan Jinren looked at him in silence. Bu Qiuxiao stared at him, saying nothing. Seeing this scene, people were shocked again. In the boat of diligent study, Lu Shisui was even more perplexed. Back in the Guoqing temple, he met that senior monk. Later, he learned that he was an enemy of his young master, so Zhao Liu asked him to go and kill him, so he went. Even though he knew that the opponent was the great Grandmaster Taiping, he didn't hesitate because he believed in his young master, so the opponent must be a bad person. But why were the immortal sect master and Guangyuan Jinren stopping others from killing him today? Excellent, excellent. The senior monks from the instruction hall of the Guoqing temple flew up. They knew that they were no match for the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect. But today, the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect was shocked by the fairy book and hit by the dragon-tail inkstone. He was in low spirits, so the senior monks decided to buy him some time and wait for other orthodox swordsmen to come to his aid, even at the cost of their lives. So sorry. The newcomer didn't speak like this because he was afraid or nervous, but because he had a stutter. Emochi led his fellow disciples from unknown peaks and blocked the way of these senior monks. Among the 9 peaks of Aoyama, Elder Emochi of Tianguang Peak was famous for his ugly face and gentle temperament. At this moment, his eyes were still warm, but his expression was firm. In the sea and sky around Xiaoming Island, the sword light was chaotic. The two Aoyama sword boats where the disciples of Liangwang Peak were parked a little farther away. Guananshan, Guhan, and the others were even more confused. The situation was so chaotic that they didn't understand what was going on, nor did they receive any orders from their masters. The immortal sect master stood in the sky and didn't give any orders. It seemed that he would let the masters of the peaks decide by themselves. Some elders stayed in the sword boats, looking at the figure getting farther and farther away with complicated expressions. Some teachers flew out on their swords to stop the cultivators of the various sections. It wasn't until the cloud boat of the Zhongzhou school moved slightly and Bai Jinren leaped up with the wind that Lu Ci shot a meaningful glance at her. The confrontations were going on everywhere, and nobody paid any attention to him. He Wei, the sect master of Kunlun, thought this was the best opportunity. He yelled at the demon swordsmen not to flee, and then chased after them. The cold signal bird traveled at a high speed. Soon, it had arrived a few miles behind the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect. Leaning against the back of the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect, Yin San didn't turn his head around. A ferocious screech suddenly burst out in the sky. The dark phoenix flew over from nowhere. His tail pierced through the sky like a sword, pushing He Wei and the cold signal bird onto the icy surface. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect leaped up into the sky with Yin San on his back. The dark phoenix arrived in an instant. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect landed on the back of the dark phoenix. The dark phoenix flapped his wings and flew toward the deep part of the ocean at an unimaginable speed. After being sneak attacked by Nanchu, Yuan Qijing had used the ice mirror to block Nanchu's sword head-on in order to protect Zhuoruzhui. As a result, Yuan Qijing had been silent for a long time after being severely wounded. It wasn't until then that his cold and solemn voice rang out again, "Kill him." Only he and Lu Ci knew that this statement was meant for Jingjiu. The life board of the Dark Phoenix was in Jingjiu's hand. If the Dark Phoenix were killed now, the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect would have a hard time taking Taiping Jinren away, no matter how formidable he was. Yet, nothing had happened. The dark phoenix flew faster and faster, disappearing from people's sight. The confrontation in the sky had no need to continue. Countless gazes were fixed on the deep part of the ocean. That person didn't turn his head around, regardless of whether it was Yamatsai's Dragontail Inkstone, the instruction hall of the Guoqing Temple, or He Wei's pursuit. All he did was lean against the back of the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect in silence. He was severely wounded by the fairy book of the Zhongzhou school and was extremely weak, but he still didn't take the pursuit of the swordsman in the world seriously, and he left on the back of the Dark Phoenix in a carefree and unrestrained manner. He was so calm and confident, and had an extraordinary bearing. He didn't look like a demon at all, he looked more like a fairyman. Looking at the sword lights in the sky, Zhao Leia's face turned pale. She didn't strike because her cultivation state was not high enough, and her mind was in a mess. If she stepped forward, it would be an indication of the attitude of the Shenhua Peak. Yet, she didn't think she was qualified to do so. Yuan Chu, Ping Yongka and those disciples of Shiyue Peak who were responsible for driving the boats were shocked to the extreme, and they didn't know what to say with their mouths wide open. Jingjiu walked to her side and looked at the sky. Zhao Lei had already guessed what had happened. Thinking of Jingjiu's identity, she asked worriedly, "Are you all right?" Jingjiu remained silent while looking at the deep part of the ocean. He had been searching for the ghosts in Aoyama. Of course, he knew there were more than 2 or 3 of them, but he didn't expect there to be so many of them. An idea suddenly occurred to Jingjiu that he was the real ghost in the eyes of these people. End of this chapter. Chapter 510. Taiping Jinren had left. Yet, the atmosphere on the West Ocean grew even more tense. The cultivation practitioners of various sects looked at the elders and disciples of the Aoyama sect, their eyes full of anger and shock. The elders and disciples of the Aoyama sect were staring at the cloud boat of the Zhongzhou school, and their sharp gazes fell on Tong Yen. Jing Jiu was also looking at Tong Yen. There were a dozen Aoyama sword boats and nearly 1,000 swordsmen of the Aoyama sect. Yet, Tong Yen sensed Jing Jiu's gaze clearly. She was taken aback a bit, and then she nodded in greeting. Tong Yen pretended to betray her sect and endured the humiliation for many years. Finally, she won the trust of Jian Shilai and came to this place. She found the evidence of the collusion between Taiping Jinren and the Western Sea Sword School, and swore to eliminate this demonic person at the cost of a fairy book. But your Aoyama sect not only didn't appreciate it, but also pointed your flying swords at us. What do you want? Standing at the bow of the boat, Bai Jinren went on expressionlessly while looking at Lu Ci. I'd like to ask the immortal why you stood in front of that demonic person earlier? And this person should be the elder Mo Qi of the Tianguang Peak. Why did you and Guangyuan Jinren block the pursuit of the orthodox cultivation practitioners? Shouldn't the Aoyama sect give us an explanation today? The broken ice on the surface of the ocean returned to the ice layer after being hit by the ocean wave. It was deathly quiet in heaven and earth apart from these noises. The atmosphere was so tense that it was suffocating. Were the two leading sects of the orthodox cultivation circle going to have a head-on confrontation? In order to defeat the West Ocean Sword School, the immortal Lu Ci had almost moved the entire Aoyama sect to this place. But the Zhongzhou school had only sent one cloud boat. Besides Bai Jinren, there were no other swordsmen on the boat, and only the young disciples were on the boat. Even though Yuan Qijing was severely wounded by Nanchu and the Dark Phoenix had left, the Aoyama sect was still confident of winning the war. However, the Aoyama sect and the Zhongzhou school were not the only orthodox cultivation sects at the West Ocean Sword School. There were also dozens of orthodox cultivation sects such as Yamatsai, the Guoqing Temple, the Kunlun sect, Ozawa sect, the Platonist sect and the Platonist sect. Who would they support if a war broke out? Yamatsai had always been an ally of the Zhongzhou school. Even though they had maintained a neutral stance in the struggle in the imperial court of Zhaoga City a few days ago, it was evident that they wouldn't do so today. As for the Guoqing Temple and the Aoyama sect, the Zen master hated Taiping Jinren the most, so he wouldn't support the Aoyama sect. It was true that all the problems were caused by Taiping Jinren. Even the allies of the Aoyama sect like Ozawa sect and the Platonist sect had to keep silent when it came to this person who had brought chaos to the human world and killed tens of thousands of people, to say nothing of the other sections. People like my master can kill anyone in the world. What your sect has done is not wrong, and I won't blame my friend Tong Yen. Lu Ci's voice rang out. As for the explanation that Bai Jinren wants, it's actually quite simple. No matter how much my master deserved to die, I didn't do anything wrong by saving him. Hearing this, Bai Jinren raised his eyebrows slightly. Before she could speak, Lu Ci continued nonchalantly, but this means that I deserved to die. Bai Jinren said sharply, in the eyes of the immortal, Guangyuan Jinren, Elder Mo Qi, and the others didn't do anything wrong, right? Lu Ci looked at those who had helped his master escape with their swords. Guangyuan Jinren was expressionless, and Elder Mo Qi looked ashamed. Lu Ci suddenly laughed. I can understand why they did what they did. No matter what, my master was once the sect master of Aoyama. In their minds they can do anything to Aoyama, but you people can't. Before Bai Jinren could speak again, Lu Ci waved his hand tiredly and said, That's all for today. If anyone thinks Aoyama is wrong, you are welcome to come and question me. Having said that, he landed on the largest sword boat and said nonchalantly, Let's go. The sword boat turned around slowly, heading toward the east. Over 10 sword boats of Aoyama followed closely behind, leaving the West Ocean slowly. Only the sword boat of Bihu Peak was left behind. Chen Yutian would represent Aoyama to deal with the aftermath of the Western Sea Sword School. Seeing this, the cultivation practitioners of various sects were shocked speechless. They looked at each other in bewilderment, wondering if they were leaving just like that. Everybody had seen Lu Ci block the heavenly thunder for Taiping Jinren, Guang Yuan Jinren stop Buqiuxiao, and Elder Mo Qi block the Guoqing temple with a group of people. They had seen so many things, but they were leaving just like that? Buqiuxiao's face looked terrible, but he didn't move. The highly achieved monks of the Guoqing temple pressed their palms together, saying nothing, and didn't move either. Bai Jinren didn't move either. The sea breeze slowly pushed the floating ice, and the sea breeze slowly pushed the sword boats to their respective destinations. Taiping Jinren was a threat in Chaotian that must be killed. Anyone who stood on his side would be hunted by the whole world. Back then, the Aoyama sect had to promise to imprison him in the sword jail forever in order to save his life. They didn't dare let him go like they did now. If it were before, Buqiuxiao would strike, the Guoqing temple would strike, and so would Bai Jinren. Yet, they didn't strike, not even a little bit. There was only one reason why they didn't do so. That sword light was still in everyone's eyes. In the sword boat of Aoyama, Mo Qi and a few young brothers knelt down before the immortal Lu Ci. He lowered his head, his trembling voice full of regret and guilt. I couldn't restrain myself. Looking at the clouds in the sky, Lu Ci said with a smile, "Young brother, I couldn't restrain myself." By now Mo Qi remembered that the Big Brother sect master had done the most to let his master go. He couldn't help but feel bewildered, wondering what was going on. Lu Ci sighed again. "Aoyama, if you could restrain yourself, you wouldn't be called Aoyama." Jingjiu looked at the sword boat in the front. Lu Ci was in the cabin, so he couldn't see him. Yet, he thought he could see him smiling faintly and sighing once in a while. He knew that Lu Ci was not as unharmed as he appeared to be. He had seen the real heavenly punishment. He knew that the thunder and fire brought down by the fairy book was the heavenly punishment. Lu Ci was in his best condition when his sword returned to him that day. He was undoubtedly the most powerful swordsman in Chaotian, but it was the heavenly punishment. The situation at the West Ocean was not a problem until the fairy light broke through Xiaoming Island and landed in the dark cloud. Jingjiu had to admit that the arrangement of the Zhongzhou school was quite good. Even his big brother didn't expect Tong Yen to appear there. What he didn't expect was that Lu Ci would stand in front of his big brother. More importantly, as Lu Ci joined the fight, Guang Yuan Jinren, Mo Qi and the others also stood out. As a result, the crack in the Aoyama sect became visible. Where would the crack, which had been suppressed by Jingjiu, Lu Ci and Yuan Qijing for 300 years, lead the Aoyama sect to? Nanchu had said before his sword fight with Lu Ci that the downfall of Aoyama would start today. Though Jingjiu didn't know what Nanchu meant, he had the same sentiments. However, it was not because Lu Ci would be defeated by Nanchu, but for another reason. The most powerful sects and worlds would be destroyed by the internal strife. Thinking of this, Jingjiu pulled back his gaze and looked at the cloud boat of the Zhongzhou school. The sword boat and the cloud boat were passing by each other at a distance of a few miles. On the cloud boat, Jingjiu saw the young woman in white clothing. She stood in the crowd in a low-profile manner, looking inconspicuous. The ocean wind tousled her black hair, making her look even more feeble. Bai Zhao felt surprised to see Jingjiu. "You were not here earlier. When did you come?" She flashed a faint smile at him from a distance of a few miles. The smile was elegant and strong, like the white gardenia flower. Jingjiu looked at her, saying nothing. A few years ago, when he was asleep in the Guoqing temple, Tong Yen went to him for help with the green sky mirror on her back. After he woke up, Jingjiu learned some details. After leaving the Cloud Dream Mountain, Tong Yen traveled day and night to Aoyama. On the way, she received a letter from Bai Zhao, learning that Jingjiu was in the Guoqing temple, so she changed her direction. However, the theft of the green sky mirror must have alerted Bai Jinren. Tong Yen was in a hurry to escape, so she didn't have time to make an appointment with Bai Zhao. She traveled day and night. How did Bai Zhao deliver the letter to Jingjiu? That year, Tong Yen heard the call for help from the green sky mirror in the manor cave left behind by Lo Huainan. He started digging the tunnel without hesitation. He had been digging for a few years. In the end, he had reached the deep part of the earth source and arrived in front of the green sky mirror. The green sky mirror was encased in a thick layer of ice. Qing flew out from it. She looked weak and dim, as if she would vanish at any moment. Yet, she asked Jingjiu excitedly if he came to rescue her. Tong Yen said no, that he had dug the tunnel for a few years in order to find out what had happened and then make a decision. The black and white were not important to the chessboard, they were the most basic rules. Qing told Jingjiu about her awakening, including how Bai Jinren had treated her. Tong Yen thought his master was wrong. He used the magic to melt the ice and took out the green sky mirror. As he was about to flee with the green sky mirror, he barged into a patch of fog and encountered Bai Jinren. The green sky mirror was a heavenly treasure. Even if the unicorn was not here, the Zhongzhou school wouldn't allow such a thing to happen. Tong Yen knelt before Bai Jinren, waiting for his death. The green sky mirror was covered with snow and frost. Qing could dissipate at any moment. Bai Zhao hurried over. He told his mother a story about the West Ocean while kneeling on the ground, asking his mother to help his big brother redeem himself. This was a good story, but it wasn't enough to persuade Bai Jinren. It was because it was Guodong's arrangement that Tong Yen wanted to kill the godly swordsman of West Ocean, which had nothing to do with the Zhongzhou school. The Zhongzhou school needed the godly swordsman of West Ocean to resist the sword sect of Aoyama. Tong Yen told another story. He heard the beginning of the story from Su Zai, and he came up with the ending part on the spot. Having heard the story, Bai Jinren was finally moved. He agreed with them and gave the 10,000-mile seal to Tong Yen. This magic treasure could save Tong Yan's life at the critical moment, and it was also a forbidding formation. The Zhongzhou school would know where he was at any time, so he couldn't escape. Hearing what his mother said, Bai Zhao's countenance didn't change, but his heart felt cold. Back when she took two 10,000-mile seals to the cultivation tournament, Lo Huainan used one, and the other one was always by her side. In other words, her parents had known where she was the entire time she and Jingjiu were trapped in the snowland for 6 years. Bai Jinren left, as if he had never been there. Qing woke up again. She didn't know what had happened, and she couldn't hold on any longer. She told Tong Yen that Jingjiu could help her. The Zhongzhou school knew that Jingjiu was in the Guoqing temple, but Tong Yen shouldn't have known it since she had been digging the tunnel for 5 years. In order to make this story more perfect without any loopholes, he found a reason, which was that Bai Zhao wrote a letter to Tong Yen. Soon after, Su Zai told Yin San about the manor cave of Tianjinren, and then went to the Zhongzhou school. He met Bai Zhao through the 1,000-year lotus seed, and made an agreement with the Zhongzhou school. The godly swordsman of West Ocean had been waiting for Yin San to come to the West Ocean, and then he would join hands with the Zhongzhou school. Tong Yen brought the green sky mirror to the cold mountain and found the king of fire carps under the ground. A spiritual awareness of the king of fire carps entered the illusionary realm of the green sky mirror, and a fish could chat with the eldest young master Zhang in the well. Nobody knew that a fairy book of the Zhongzhou school had entered the well along with the spiritual awareness. Tong Yen had to make his first choice when he was besieged by the sun banner of Wang Xiaoming. He squeezed the 10,000-mile seal in his sleeve, but it was useless. He won the bet, but the green sky mirror was taken away by Jingjiu. In the 3,000 nunnery outside Yuan City, he remained silent while facing the lake for many days. Jingjiu brought the green sky mirror back to him, after many twists and turns. In the end, he brought the green sky mirror to the West Ocean and was locked up on Xiaoming Island. He dug another tunnel and entered that secret room, where he continued to wait in silence. Until today. The secret room was opened. Taiping Jinren walked in. Chapter 511. The Battle of the West Ocean had come to an end. Different parties had different opinions on which of them would benefit from the battle, but undoubtedly, the Aoyama sect was the true winner and would get the most benefits. As for the escape of Taiping Jinren, as long as Lu Ci could still wield his sword, nobody would dare make trouble for him. Yet, Jingju didn't think so. After this battle, Taiping Jinren stood in the open, the Dark Phoenix defected, and Aoyama sowed the seeds of the civil strife. The Zhongzhou school had won the battle. He didn't care much about Bai Zhao and Tong Yen. Those two young men merely inherited Guodong's idea of killing Jian Shilai and then his big brother. As for what had happened later, it was Aoyama's own fault. It was he who returned the green sky mirror to Tong Yen of his own accord. He had calculated many things, but he had miscalculated one thing. As a result, things had turned out this way in the end. Thinking of all this, Jingju nodded to Bai Zhao and walked back to the cabin of the boat. Bai Zhao was taken aback. He turned around and left. Though it seemed normal, why did she feel as empty as the vast West Ocean and as cold as the floating ice around Xiaoming Island? She didn't understand why, the same way she didn't understand why the immortal Lu Ci would come out today even though he had imprisoned Taiping Jinren for 300 years. There were 17 sword boats when they arrived, and 14 sword boats when they returned, the same number of sword boats. But the feeling they gave off was completely different. The immortal Lu Ci had wielded his sword and killed Nanchu, his mortal enemy of 1,000 years, and the godly swordsman of West Ocean had fled after being severely wounded. The Western Sea Sword School had been destroyed, and the Aoyama sect had only sacrificed 2 sword boats, and the number of their disciples who were killed or wounded was not high. It was a happy event worthy of being noted. However, the sword boats traveling in heaven and earth were as silent as ever. Watching the Aoyama sword boat leave, the cultivators of the various sects were silent. Some were in shock and awe, while others were thinking of more profound reasons. The power of the thunder fire was not much weaker than the heavenly tribulation, but enlightened Lu Ci withstood it just like that. Was he seriously injured? If something were to happen to him, what kind of violent storm would the cultivation world face? The sun was blazing, the sea breeze was incessant, the floating ice was melting, and the clouds in the sky were blown away in all directions. The cultivators of the various sects also left with Lu Yun. The cloud ship of Zhongzhou school was very quiet. The disciples stood on several floors of the ship and stared at the sky around them vigilantly. The situation today was too chaotic. Too many things had happened in the end. Who knew if Aoyama's sect would suddenly go crazy? There were only 2 people in the top cabin of the cloud ship. Bai Jinren looked at Tong Yen and said with an indifferent expression, "Lu Ci must die this time. You have made a great contribution. What do you want?" Kneeling on the ground, Tong Yen said, "Master, please let Qing live." Bai Jinren had made a promise when he agreed to let Jingjiu take the green sky mirror and leave the Cloud Dream Mountain. If Taiping Jinren was killed by Tong Yan's scheme, Jingjiu would let the green sky mirror go free. Tong Yen was fully aware that his master couldn't let a treasure like the green sky mirror leave the Zhongzhou school. The so-called freedom meant staying alive. "Is Taiping dead?" Bai Jinren asked nonchalantly. Tong Yen looked at the green sky mirror on the floor beside him and remained silent for a while. Then he got up, bowed to Jingjiu, and walked out of the cabin door. The gentle wind ruffled the ribbon gently, as if it was an unpredictable emotion. Bai Zhao was waiting for Jingjiu outside the door. Seeing the cold expression in Tong Yan's eyes, Jingjiu knew her mother's decision, feeling a bit surprised. The cold expression in Tong Yan's eyes was gradually replaced by a painful and apologetic expression, but the expression on his face didn't change, nor did his energy. Jingjiu could let Bai Zhao see his pain and weakness, but he couldn't let Bai Jinren sense it. Bai Zhao said in a trembling voice, "You have tried your best." Tong Yen uttered Then, he asked himself a question. Have you really tried your best? Qing didn't know what Jing Jiu intended to do from the beginning to the end. She thought that Jing Jiu merely wanted to take her to escape from the Cloud Dream Mountain. She had no idea about the scheme of the West Ocean and the fairy book brought into the illusionary realm by the King of Fire Carps, nor did she know that there were so many deals and conspiracies behind the scheme. Jing Jiu had concealed Qing very well. He had deceived the whole world very well. In the end, he had succeeded. So, Jing Jiu asked himself one more time, have you really tried your best? Jing Jiu could even predict Tai Pingjinren's plan and deceive the whole world. Why couldn't he do it? The answer was obvious. In fact, Jing Jiu had already known the answer when Bai Jinren said it. As such, he didn't tell his master about the snow girl. Not a single word. After the 14 sword boats of Aoyama arrived in Chaotian, one of them left the group and headed southward. Izhou was not far to the south. If they continued heading toward the barren mountain devoid of spiritual energy, they would see a collapsed cliff. The fine powder was everywhere in front of the cliff. The original shapes of the flowers and trees were nowhere to be seen, and the old temple and the black coffin were nowhere to be found. This sword boat belonged to the Shenma Peak. Zhao Leia brought the white cat back to the boat. The white cat had lost a great deal of blood, and his long hair was stuck together. He looked terrible, as if he had been severely wounded. Yuan Chu and Ping Yongkao were startled. Nan Wang sneered and carried the unconscious Nan Zheng into the cabin of the boat. For some reason, she didn't kill this former member of her tribe. The white cat knew what her sneer meant, but he didn't pay any attention to it. All he did was lean against Zhao Leia's bosom and pretend to be weak with his eyes closed, thinking that he had earned this treatment by risking his life. The stars filled the sky. The highest peak was so white that it was dazzling. The huge sword boat hovering in the night sky a few miles away was clearly illuminated by the stars. This was the most desolate place in Chaotian, so there was no need to worry that the mortals would be disturbed by the scene. Standing on the peak top, Jing Jiu remained silent as he watched the scene. He didn't feel discouraged and have the idea of leaving Aoyama. The reason the sword boat on the Shenma Peak left the group was because he had an important conversation with someone. The night wind blew over and the starlight flickered slightly. Lu Xi landed by Jing Jiu's side. "You're late," said Jing Jiu. Lu Xi said, "It's not like you don't know why I fly so slowly." It seemed that they had had a similar conversation on their way out of Cloud Dream Mountain back then. Both Jing Jiu and Lu Xi displayed a calm and nonchalant expression on their faces. Killing Nan Chu was the most difficult task in the world, but they didn't show much joy or fear in their eyes. This fact had been determined the day Jing Jiu returned to Aoyama 30 years ago. As long as they joined hands, they would be invincible in the world. As long as Jing Jiu was willing to accept that matter. Nan Chu used the sword ghost as a human and the human as a sword. He had indeed created a new sword style. As Lu Xi said, Jing Jiu had already taken the lead, and he was the one who had combined the two sword styles. Of course, the role played by Lu Xi was more important. If it were Zhu Ruzhui who had wielded the sword that day, would he be able to kill Nan Chu? He probably couldn't even cut a hair of Nan Chu's. Lu Xi was the only one who had the ability and was qualified to wield the sword. He was the true and absolute #1 swordsman in the world right now. Will the Foggy Island produce another Nan Chu? Jing Jiu seemed to be talking to himself, but also asking a question. Looking at the sword boat under the starlight, Lu Xi said, "No." "Will Jian Shilai come back?" asked Jing Jiu. "It should be very difficult," said Lu Xi. Jing Jiu fell silent for a while before saying, "Oh, it's you." Lu Xi uttered This was very faint, with no obvious inflection, but it was very significant. Back when Taiping Jinren was released from the sword jail and Lei Poyan was silenced, it meant that there was a ghost in Aoyama. Jingjiu had been trying to find out who that ghost was over the years since he had returned to Aoyama. Lu Xi and Yuan Qijing were the people he trusted the most, but they were also the ones he was most suspicious of. Only they had the ability to do so. Fang Jingtian couldn't do it even if he didn't conceal his prowess. Yet, he didn't know who that ghost was. They were all companions who had eaten hot pot with him, killed someone, and attacked his big brother. It didn't make any sense. The answer had finally been revealed today. Lu Xi was the biggest ghost of them all. Jingjiu said calmly while shooting a glance at the sheath of the inherited heaven sword in Lu Xi's hand, "You guys have one." The sword of the universe was hovering in the night sky above the peak top in silence, absorbing the starlight. There would be no contest of flying swords tonight, because the difference in their cultivation states was too great. More importantly, Jingjiu had accepted Lu Xi's invitation from the West Ocean in the ruined temple on the barren mountain. Everything had been decided. Jingjiu said, "If Big Brother had planned all of this, I have to admit that I'm convinced." "No," Lu Xi said, "you're wrong and so is he. More precisely, both of you are thinking too much." Jingjiu said, "Wasn't it his arrangement to ask me to return to the sheath? Releasing my master from the sword jail doesn't mean that I support him, and I won't listen to his arrangement." Lu Xi said after shooting a glance at him, "Today's matter is actually very simple. I just want a sword." In the few times he and Jingjiu met over the years, they talked about swords the most. Lu Xi kept saying that he didn't have a sword, either earnestly or helplessly, or sighing with emotion. The meaning behind his words was obvious. He wanted a sword. Or in other words, he wanted his own sword back. Jingjiu had never responded to Lu Xi's request before. Back when he held the fairy glove of the Zhongzhou school in his left hand and was in great danger, Jingjiu refused Lu Xi's request without hesitation. This was something Jingjiu didn't want to do the most, and it was a taboo. The inherited heaven sword was never a sword, but a sheath. This scabbard was specially used to control the sword. The Aoyama sect had been established tens of thousands of years ago, and it had always been like this. The sect masters of every generation were the sword holders. The sword couldn't be free when it was in the sheath. Jingjiu didn't like this feeling. Even though he had accepted Lu Xi's request that day, he didn't forget to say, "This is my sword." Lu Xi said, "I'm the sect master. This is of course my sword." Jingjiu waved his hand, indicating that they shouldn't argue over such a childish issue. Lu Xi suddenly asked, "Did you ask Guqing to return the green sky mirror to Tong Yen back then because you had already predicted the intention of the Zhongzhou school?" Jingjiu said, "I thought he and Su Zai intended to kill Jian Shilai." Lu Xi said, "You might have thought so in the beginning, but you should have guessed what would happen after you received my master's letter." After a moment of silence, Jingjiu said, "You're right. Killing him is what I've always wanted to do." After receiving the letter, Jingjiu, Lu Xi and Yuan Qijing had a small meeting on the top of Tianguang Peak, with the round turtle as the witness. At the end of the meeting, Jingjiu had set the foundation for this expedition to the West Ocean. Kill Nanchu first and then Taiping, and then the world would be at peace. This was a goal, a reminder, and a warning. No matter who was the devil, Lu Xi or Yuan Qijing, they should think about the consequences. If everything went according to Jingjiu's plan, no matter how many ideas the Zhongzhou school had and how perfect the scheme of Bai Zhao and Tong Yen was, Aoyama wouldn't suffer any loss. At least, Jingjiu's Aoyama wouldn't suffer any loss. There was one thing that Jingjiu had failed to predict, but it seemed that Bai Zhenren had predicted it. Lu Xi stepped forward. The heavenly punishment fell on him. Jingjiu shot a glance at Lu Xi and said, "It's not worth it." Lu Xi glanced at the surface of the ocean and let out a smile. Chapter 5:12. It was not worth it. What Jingju meant was that Lu Ci stood in front of Yin San at the last moment and blocked the thunder and fire with his palm. Even if Lu Ci were that devil, he shouldn't have done so. It was not something a cultivation practitioner should do. Lu Ci had told Emochi about the relationship between Aoyama and failing to restrain himself on the sword boat, but he didn't explain it to Jingju. He was fully aware that Jingju wouldn't agree even if he could understand it. Back when he ascended the Shangda Peak, he became Yuan Qijing's young brother because he was greedy for the view of the Pine Ocean. Taiping Jinren didn't get angry. On the contrary, he liked it a bit, but Jingju didn't have any reaction. The first time Lu Ci saw him was when he sat by the cliff's edge and gazed at the ocean of clouds in a daze. Later on, he had been in a daze, no matter if he was by the cliff's edge, in the manor cave, by the mahjong table, or in front of the hot pot. At the time, the immortal Daoyuan and the great grandmaster were dead, and the position of the sect master was taken away. The Shangda Peak was under great pressure. Yet, it seemed that the young man couldn't feel anything. He sat there in a daze. Lu Ci wondered if this young senior master had become a fool because of his cultivation. It wasn't until later that the immortal Taiping took them to eat hot pot and headed toward Machen Peak. He witnessed with his own eyes how many seniors had been killed by his young senior master. Only then did he realize that he was an idiot. As far as the true cultivation practitioners were concerned, they were cultivating even when they were in a daze. It wasn't until that day that Lu Ci realized that his young senior master was a natural cultivation practitioner, and that all the cultivation practitioners should learn from him. However, it was a pity that most people couldn't reach such a state, including himself. Yet Lu Ci found that Jingju had changed a bit over the years. He asked, "Back when my master promised that the fowls and dogs would ascend to heaven, he drew out a strand of spiritual soul from the life board. But I know that you must have something up your sleeve, otherwise you wouldn't have brought that small bamboo board with you all the time. Why didn't you kill the Dark Phoenix when my big brother asked you to do it? The one I want to kill is your master, not anyone else. If Little Four doesn't want to kill me, I won't think of touching him either." Thinking of the scene at the West Ocean during the day, Jingju said indifferently, "I just didn't expect so many people to support him. The 9 peaks of Aoyama are all Shangda Peak. He is our master after all. Even if they were young back then, they could still remember some things." Lu Ci sighed. "Master has been imprisoned in the sword jail by us. How many people do you think are willing to submit to us?" Jingju was silent for a while, then said, "Maybe in their eyes I'm the ghost. I've said it before. The biggest problem for you and Master is that you think too much." Lu Ci said, "How can there be so many ghosts? Emochi is not a ghost, and neither am I. But if you keep looking, you will find more and more ghosts." Jingju recalled what he had said to Zhao Liu at Shinma Peak. Everyone has a ghost in their heart, so everyone looks like a ghost. This statement wasn't exactly the same as what Lu Ci had said, but its meaning was roughly the same. Lu Ci didn't think he was a ghost because he didn't have a ghost in his heart. But why did he release Taiping Jinren from the sword jail? This was the most important question, and it was the answer that Jingju wanted to know the most tonight. The starlight fell on the sword of the universe and was reflected to the peak top, making the night even quieter. Lu Ci reached out his finger to play with the starlight, saying, "At that time, your ascension was already a foregone conclusion. I had to consider what to do after Aoyama. My big brother and I only had about 100 years of life left. Who would take over the situation after our death? Even if Little Four and Guang Yuan could break through the state, could they replace us?" Though 100 years was a long time, it was only a few moments for a cultivation practitioner who had been in closed-door training all year round. Jingju didn't like the intent revealed in Lu Ci's words. He called back the sword of the universe so that Lu Ci couldn't play with the starlight. The great formation of Aoyama can protect itself, he said. Lu Xi pulled back his finger and said, as Nan Chu said today, Aoyama can't afford to be defeated. Once it is defeated, it will be defeated. As far as Aoyama is concerned, protecting itself is the same as being defeated. I didn't hear that, said Jingjiu. Lu Xi didn't argue with him, and continued, the Aoyama sect has been domineering for too many years, and has offended too many people. And the disciples of Liangwang Peak have killed too many people in the outside world. I didn't agree to build Liangwang Peak back then, snapped Jingjiu. What's the point? So I didn't say anything when you took the lone sword with you. Lu Xi went on with a faint smile, but I'm the sect master. Unlike you, I have to consider my future. So you let him go, said Jingjiu. That's right, said Lu Xi. My master has always thought that Aoyama is his own Aoyama, and that he would want to return to Aoyama someday. So he wouldn't allow Aoyama to decline without doing anything. Aren't you afraid that he will take revenge? Pressed Jingjiu. Lu Xi shot him a glance and said, it was the three of us who had attacked him back then. We thought that you were going to leave, and my big brother and I would die sooner or later, so there was nothing to be afraid of. After a moment of silence, Jingjiu said, what you said is somewhat reasonable. Tai Pingzhenren was a very outstanding figure. He had helpers like Bulo Lin, the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect, and the Emperor Xiao, and could change the entire situation of Chaotian by himself. As long as he was alive and guarded the world in silence, nothing would happen to Aoyama, at least nothing serious. Tai Pingzhenren was like a ferocious tiger crouching in the darkness of the night. What Lu Xi did was to let the tiger out of the mountain. What he didn't expect was that someone had come back. Jingjiu had never asked a tiger for its skin, and he had always stayed away from all dangers. Even though he thought Lu Xi's idea was reasonable, he still disagreed with him, saying, sometimes you think this way, and sometimes you think that way. You're too clingy, just like the Zhongzhou school. You're not even as good as your disciple. He was referring to Zhuo Ruzhui. Lu Xi was displeased, not because he was called inferior to his disciple, but because he was called like the Zhongzhou school. Jingjiu continued, you've been like this since you were young. I really shouldn't have chosen you to be the sect master back then. Come on then, said Lu Xi calmly. It was quiet on the peak top. The sword boat could be seen clearly under the starlight. The faint meowing of a cat could be heard, and it sounded very comfortable. Hearing Lu Xi's words, Jingjiu was about to say, don't even think about it, and refuse him directly like he used to, even though it was a bit uncomfortable to be rebuked. But tonight, he was silent. He remained silent for a long time. Lu Xi said to Jingjiu with a faint smile, only the sect master can hold the sheath of the inherited heaven sword. You'd better think it through before you answer me. The sword was already back in the sheath. Jingjiu had to make sure that the sheath of the inherited heaven sword was in the hands of someone he absolutely trusted if he didn't want anything bad to happen to it. Who in the world could he trust more than himself? It turned out that Lu Xi's invitation had another meaning. He was waiting for Jingjiu here. It was the first time that Jingjiu didn't answer the question directly. I didn't expect that I would fall into your trap, he said. Lu Xi said, my master has been shrewd his whole life, but he has been tricked by two juniors of the Zhongzhou school. Jingjiu said, they have inherited the ideas of the Sanyue, but they are smarter than her. Big Brother has finally met his match. Though these two statements seemed ordinary, they were actually compliments to Bai Zhao and Tong Yen. If it weren't for Lu Xi, Yin San would have died on Xiaoming Island. The Zhongzhou school's calculation was flawless. The heavenly punishment triggered by the fairy book could kill anybody in Chaotian. It was because Lu Xi had a sword that day, and he had killed Nanchu first, so his energy and cultivation state were at their peak that he was able to withstand the heavenly punishment. Of course, Lu Xi had paid a great price for it. Thinking of this, Jingju felt a bit emotional. Lu Xi was moved, saying, "That fairy book is just an accessory book, so it doesn't have the fairy awareness, but its power is pretty good." Jingju couldn't help but say, "It's not good at all." Lu Xi was quite moved and said comfortingly, "Don't worry. You won't die tonight. You should be able to live for a few more years." For the swordsman in the upper limit of the heavenly arrival state who had lived more than 1,000 years, a few years was equivalent to dozens of days for mortals. After a moment of silence, Jingju said again, "It's not worth it. You should be well aware that I have no hope of ascending, and my life is coming to an end. I can only live for a few decades at most." Lu Xi went on with a faint smile, "If I can live forever, nothing can be exchanged for a comfortable life. Why not?" The brave and benevolent people in the human world, as well as the wicked and wicked ones, probably had the same idea. Thinking this, Jingju said, "There's no way to prove immortality." Why did he say so when he was determined to ascend? Others wouldn't understand what he meant, but Lu Xi understood what he meant. It became quiet on the peak top again. The starlight shone on the sword boat and the dark clouds. Standing by the cliff's edge, Jingju and Lu Xi gazed at the world in silence. It was beautiful. After an unknown period of time, Lu Xi suddenly asked, "What do you want to do?" Standing shoulder to shoulder, they looked down at the world. If they joined hands, they would be invincible in the world. They could do whatever they wanted to do. "As you said, I'm only interested in cultivation and finding that ghost. I'm not interested in anything else." Looking at Lu Xi, Jingju asked, "What about you? Do you have any unfinished business that you want to do?" "I don't have anything in particular that I want to do," Lu Xi said with a faint smile. "The life of a cultivation practitioner is always so boring. We don't cultivate because it's interesting." Jingju asked, "Do farmers cultivate because it's interesting? Do fishermen fish because it's interesting? Do sea girls risk their lives to fish for sea pearls because it's interesting?" Lu Xi said helplessly, "I know you're in a bad mood, but I'm just expressing my feelings. Why are you so agitated?" Jingju looked calm, but it was rare for him to say such a long sentence, not to mention that it was a series of contrasts, which showed that he wasn't in a good mood. He raised his eyebrows and reprimanded, "I'm just expressing my feelings. Why are you so sensitive?" Lu Xi said, "The examples you cited were all forced by life. But we cultivate because we can cultivate. We have Tao in our hearts. How can we treat them the same?" Jingju asked, "Then is it interesting to fight and scheme in the imperial court? Is it interesting to boil tea? Is it interesting to draw pictures? Is it interesting to play chess?" These things might be interesting in the eyes of others, but they were equally boring to him. Playing chess required a lot of mental energy. If it was only for the sake of winning or losing, then it would be better to strike with a sword. That would be the ultimate winner. At this moment, Tong Yan's voice suddenly drifted over from the night sky. "Playing chess is interesting, but the way you play chess is naturally meaningless." Lu Xi and Jingju naturally knew that he had come. They were discussing what else they wanted to do. Jingju's last sentence was meant for Tong Yan. Whether it was calculating or playing chess, they were all means of seeking Tao. If a cultivation practitioner indulged in it because of a momentary success, problems would arise. Tong Yan landed on the peak and bowed to Lu Xi earnestly. For some reason, he had left the cloud ship of Zhongzhou school and rushed here in the middle of the night. Jingju shot him a glance, meaning to ask how he knew they were here. Tong Yan had been with him for a long time on the cold mountain and at the 3,000 nunnery, so he had learned the skills of Lu Shui, Zhao Liu and Gu Qing. "I asked Guananshan," he said. Jingju was surprised, asking, "Zhuoruzhui didn't kill you?" Tong Yan intended to kill Taiping Jinren in this scheme, but it was Lu Xi who was injured. Though it was a reflexive action to send hundreds of flying swords to chop him into minced meat, it showed the attitude of the Aoyama sect toward Tong Yen. Even if the people of Aoyama calmed down and thought about the overall situation, Zhuoruzhui, who had a bad temper, wouldn't care about this. Tong Yen said, "Nanshan persuaded him that since I came here to meet the immortal Lu, my life and death should be decided by the immortal." Lu Si asked with a small smile, "What did you come here for?" Tong Yen said, "I heard the immortal Lu say that he had nothing to do. Why don't you take the green sky mirror back to Aoyama?" Chapter 513. Such a scene often occurred in the human world. A treacherous official went to a king with the royal seal, saying that he would be punished if he didn't accept the gift from heaven. A thief said to his elder brother, "Look at the young woman across the street, she is as beautiful as a flower." A servant said to his master that he had heard that there was a precious jade screen in a manor house. Those people were all bad people, and they did evil things. Tong Yen didn't have thick eyebrows and big eyes, but he was the most promising disciple of the Zhongzhou school, the leader of the orthodox sections. Why would he do such a thing tonight? More interestingly, Lu Si, as the sect master of the Aoyama sect, the leader of the orthodox sects, didn't reprimand Jingjiu. After some thought, he said, "The cloud boat should have arrived at Zhongzhou by now. Isn't it inconvenient?" "We've just arrived," said Jingjiu. It was evident that Jingjiu had done some calculations after hearing what Tong Yen said. When they left the West Ocean during the day, it was evident that the Zhongzhou school was very cautious about whether the Aoyama sect would go crazy, so they would go back as soon as possible. Once they entered the range of the great formation of Cloud Dream, Lu Si and Jingjiu couldn't do anything more, even though they were invincible in the world. "I've been digging holes under the Cloud Dream mountain for 6 years, so I know the great formation of Cloud Dream very well. And I'm good at playing chess, so I've written down some solutions." Tong Yen made a surprising statement. "If the Zhongzhou school knows about this, you will die," said Lu Si while staring at Jingjiu. Tong Yen suggested that the Aoyama sect should seize the green sky mirror, and he was even willing to help with the plan. This was a sin that no sect would forgive. Even though he had just made a great contribution to the Zhongzhou school, this was not a fake betrayal, but a real betrayal. "I haven't thought about it," said Tong Yen. Under the starlight, his eyebrows looked even fainter, like the life and death in his eyes. "Have you ever thought that we might kill you?" asked Jingjiu. Whether it was to silence her or to take revenge on that heavenly tribulation, both were reasons to kill Tong Yen. Tong Yen replied calmly, "Yes, but not too much. I've told you that I'm a chess player, and I only see black and white. Taiping Jinren deserves to die, so I'll try my best to kill him. As for your Aoyama sect wanting to save him, that's your business. I shouldn't be responsible for the consequences." "I didn't expect you to be so similar to Shui," said Jingjiu. Tong Yen said, "So I had a good time working with him." When Jingjiu and Bai Zhao were plotted against by Lo Huainan and were trapped in the snowfield for 6 years, Tong Yen, Zhao Liu, and Lu Shui conspired to kill Lo Huainan. This was what he was talking about. It was indeed a thing of the past. More than 20 years had passed. Jingjiu shot a glance at Lu Si. Lu Si looked at Tong Yen with an appreciative expression in his eyes, but he didn't agree to his request, saying, "I don't accept it." Tong Yen wasn't surprised or disappointed, waiting quietly for what was to come. Lu Si said, "Unless you and the green sky mirror belong to our Aoyama sect." "Okay," said Tong Yen after some thought. Such a straightforward decision was indeed not the style of the Zhongzhou school. Jingjiu thought he should be a disciple of Aoyama sect. In the night sky, the starlight shone on the deck of the sword boat, as if it were covered with a layer of snow. Tong Yen landed on the deck. Yuan Chu looked at him expressionlessly, as he thought that he shouldn't treat him nicely even if the immortal sect master and senior master didn't kill him. Tong Yen didn't heed him. He went to a corner and sat down cross-legged, starting to meditate and recuperate. The snow and frost were the same as before, devoid of footprints. Nan Wang opened his eyes and looked at Jingjiu in silence. She had learned what had happened at the West Ocean from Zhao Lei. Since then, she had remained silent with her eyes closed, as if she was exhausted. She suddenly said, "I don't know why they didn't kill you, but I'll definitely kill you after Lu Ci dies." Tong Yen remained silent. The whole of the cultivation circle knew that Nan Wang was pampered by her big brothers, so she was the most arrogant and had a high status. She would accomplish whatever she wanted to do. Zhao Lei noticed that Nan Wang didn't address the immortal sect master respectfully, and he didn't even address him as big brother. Instead, he called the sect master by his name. The night wind couldn't blow away the starlight, and the sword boat had no sails. Yet, the people on the boat had their own worries. Gu Qing was not there. Yuan Chu was not there. Zhao Lei didn't know how to deal with the current situation. It was then that a surprised, curious, and excited voice rang out. "Are you Tong Yen? Are you the genius of Zhongzhou School, who is only slightly inferior to my master in the art of chess? What are you doing here?" Looking at his light brows, Ping Yongka remembered the man he had seen at the West Ocean during the day, so he asked, "Are you going to abandon the darkness for the light?" He spoke very excitedly, his eyebrows constantly raised, as if they were about to fly away. Silence was often a sign of nervousness or awkwardness. Only then did Ping Yongka realize that his words were inappropriate, so he rubbed his hands in embarrassment. He suddenly thought of something, so he picked up a piece of felt and covered Tong Yan's entire body with it, saying, "We can't let anyone see you. Otherwise, the Zhongzhou School will find an excuse to hide you in a cave for a few years after we return to Oyama. Then, they will change your appearance and give you a new Taoist name. Who would recognize you then?" Looking at this scene, Yuan Chu could not hold it in any longer and quickly turned his face away. Nan Wang snorted coldly. Zhao Lei knew that nothing would happen again, so she closed her eyes and ignored him. The white cat rubbed against her chest, changed its posture, and went back to sleep. It kept its eyes closed the whole time. It didn't care about Tong Yen at all. The air on the sword boat suddenly became lighter. Tong Yen sat under the starlight, covered by the felt. Looking at the darkness in front of him, he thought about the words of the unknown disciple of Shenma Peak, and found that it did make some sense. The same starlight would have different brightness at different heights. For example, it looked like snow on the deck of the sword boat in the sky, but it looked like water on the top of the human peak. Water was clear and soft. If it accumulated into a lake or a sea, it would be inclusive. It was used by many people to describe the immortal Lu Ci. But his attitude toward Tong Yen had nothing to do with broad-mindedness. It was only because he appreciated her in certain aspects and that it was not easy to be a sect master. "It sounds like he has a good opinion of Lu Shui," said Lu Ci. "I brought up Shui," said Jingjiu. What he meant was that he was certainly good and he had to be good. Lu Ci stroked his short beard lightly, looking quite satisfied. "How did you know that the Lu family is my descendant?" he asked. Jingjiu said, "I care about my young martial nephew." Lu Ci said, "But when you returned to Oyama, you informed Shanghai Peak first. Many years ago, Master Lu, who was born in Shanghai Peak, heard some news and went to a small village to bring back Lu Shui with natural Dao quality. Then he saw the youth in white sitting on the bamboo chair by the pond. This was what Lu Ci was talking about." Jingjiu said, "I was born in Shanghai Peak back then. What's wrong with that?" Lu Ci thought that since he was also born in Shanghai Peak, how could he chat with him? Jingjiu said, "When something happened to Lu Shui, I asked Houzi to inform you first. He was talking about the incident when Lu Shui swallowed the devil pill in the muddy river and was imprisoned in the sword jail. Such incidents had happened many times in the last 30 years. Gu Qing and Houzi kept talking, and Yuan Chu kept going to Shanghai Peak. Tonight, all the things hidden behind the scenes had been revealed. You always say that I'm clingy, sometimes one way and sometimes another. Aren't you the same? Lu Xi said, you try Big Brother one moment and me the next. You don't trust anyone. This won't work. Looking at the sword boat in the night sky, Jingjiu said, it's just that I don't trust you. He had never thought of changing, but in this life, he had a few more trustworthy people by his side. Those few people were either hiding in the sword boat in the night sky. Only Gu Qing and Lu Shisui were not there. Even though tonight was the first time they had reunited after a long time, people like Jingjiu and Lu Xi wouldn't talk about the old days like mortals did, not to mention that they didn't have much time left. As they were chatting, they were reading the maps and methods left behind by Tong Yen, and making some corrections. Having done all this, it was time for them to leave. 17 sword boats set off for the expedition of Aoyama to the West Ocean, because the sword work of Aoyama was upright and aboveboard. This time, they were going to steal something, so they had to be sneaky. They couldn't travel by sword boat. Looking at Jingjiu, Lu Xi said sincerely, the sword cloud is too slow. Don't even think about it, said Jingjiu. As they were talking, the sword of the universe floated up and hovered in the night sky outside the cliff, waiting for the two of them. Glancing at the sword of the universe, Lu Xi said disdainfully, as I said before, this sword is too dirty. Jingjiu ignored him, and sat in front of the sword of the universe. It's up to you whether you want to sit or not. Lu Xi had no choice but to sit on it. The sword of the universe shot up into the sky, heading toward the Cloud Dream Mountain in the distance. Jingjiu sat in front of it with his eyes closed. Lu Xi leaned against the back, his long legs swinging in the starlight. The starlight was like water. He was like a child treading water. The morning mist was the thickest at the beginning of the morning. The mist was everywhere on the Cloud Dream Mountain, blocking people's sight. When the sunlight shone through, it created a dreamy feeling. The mist was slightly disturbed. Qing turned her head to look at the beautiful valley while flapping her transparent wings. Tears welled up in her eyes, which looked like dewdrops on the leaves. This was the place where she had lived all her life. Even she couldn't remember how many tens of thousands of years had passed. Yet, her sadness wasn't the sorrow of leaving her hometown, but something else. Is he going to die? Lu Xi and Jingjiu didn't tell her that Tong Yen had gone to Aoyama. The fewer people who knew about this, the better, especially innocent and gullible newborns like Qing. Jingjiu didn't say anything. He walked faster and faster with his hands clasped behind his back, like an old farmer who was in a hurry to go up the mountain to see the harvest. Lu Xi reached out his right hand to let Qing stop on it, asking, "You don't blame him?" "Blame," Qing said with tears streaming down her cheeks. "But he won't die, will he?" "No, he won't," Lu Xi answered. Qing wiped off her tears with her small hands, walked to Lu Xi's shoulder and sat down, saying nothing more. This place was still within the range of the great formation of Cloud Dream. Though they had reached the edge, it was still dangerous for them to be discovered by the Zhongzhou school. Therefore, she should be sensible and not cause trouble for this old immortal. She thought so. As for Jingjiu, she didn't want to talk to him for the time being. He rode the wind and broke through the fog. After a long time, he finally left the Cloud Dream Mountain completely. The sword of the universe shot up into the sky. Lu Xi felt relieved. Jingjiu didn't understand why they would do that. As long as they obtained the green sky mirror, they would achieve their purpose. Even if the immortals Tan and Bai or the unicorn found them, they would have to fight with them. Even the great formation of Cloud Dream wouldn't be able to trap them, so there was nothing to be afraid of. "It's the first time I've been a thief. I can't help but feel nervous," Lu Xi explained. "I've never been a thief before," Jingjiu said after some thought. "I took a conical hat with Liu in Shangzhou City a few years ago, but I didn't pay for it. Does that count?" Lucy, I said, taking it without asking is of course a thief. But I'm more experienced than you, said Jingjiu. The trip to the Cloud Dream Mountain seemed simple, but it was not. In the great formation of Cloud Dream Mountain at the Zhongzhou school, they could steal the true spirit of the heavenly treasure. Even with the help of Tong Yen, Jingjiu and Lu Xi were the only ones who could do it 1,000 years ago. The red sun had finally arrived above the ocean of clouds. It was warm and comforting. Lu Xi thought that he should visit a few more places since it was rare for him to come out. Let's go and destroy the mysterious dark sect, he said to Jingjiu. Okay, said Jingjiu. Chapter 5:14. According to Jingjiu's character, he should have nodded or said yes at this moment. At most, he would have said yes instead of the latter. The addition of the word gave it a different meaning. It probably meant that it was up to you. You can do whatever you want. Do you see that red sun? Are you interested? Of course, he was also very interested in destroying the mysterious insect. That year, he had told Gu Qing that he had to find a time to kill Wang Xiaoming. A few days ago, Lu Xi had said that he would see if he should kill Wang Xiaoming on his way back from White Town. Since both he and Lu Xi wanted to do it, they naturally had to do it. Sitting on Lu Xi's shoulder, Qing was surprised to hear their conversation. She knew that this old immortal was an extraordinary person, and he was also the strongest person she had ever seen, but that was the Xianin sect. Even though the mysterious dark sect was not as powerful as it used to be, it still had countless highly achieved martial artists. What was more troublesome was the Sun Banner, which was the foundation of the Mountain Gate formation. How could the two of you destroy it? Hearing her question, Lu Xi said, Don't worry about it so much. Let's go and slash it first. Jingjiu said, Yes. The sword of the universe flew in the morning light. Even though the sky was red and warm, it was still as quiet as before. It entered Yu County not far from the south of the Cloud Dream Mountain. It turned to the northwest and transformed into a swift sword light. After flying for a long time, it finally arrived at Jui City. If they kept going forward from Jui City, they would enter the territory of the Cold Mountain. The outline of the snowy mountain could be vaguely seen in the distance. Of course, Jingjiu wouldn't go there. He controlled the flying altitude of the Sword of the Universe to make sure that the snowy mountain could block the view from the snowland. By the time they arrived at the deep end of the cold mountain, it was already late, and the sun was setting toward the distant West Ocean. The world was dark, and the scorching Sun Gorge, which was hundreds of miles away, was emitting a fiery light. Jingjiu took out the green sky mirror, and Qing entered it. Jingjiu then put away the green sky mirror. Lu Xi looked at him with great interest and asked, This is the hidden world? Jingjiu said, Yes. He had told Qing that the true spirit of the heavenly treasure was hidden in the world when it was born, but Lu Xi didn't refer to the green sky mirror. The breeze stirred up the grass on the ground, gradually rolling it up, trying to dazzle the eyes. Lu Xi closed his eyes and began to meditate. A moment later, he opened his eyes. He held the sheath of the inherited heaven sword in his left hand and held it horizontally in front of him. His right hand grasped the nothingness outside the sheath and pulled it out slowly. A sword chime rang out between heaven and earth. The grass suddenly fell, and the breeze immediately calmed down. The clouds in the night sky also stopped moving under their respective stars. Jingjiu floated up again. Lu Xi raised his right hand. Countless sword wills came from all over the world and gathered in his hands. Lu Xi swung his hand down. There was a buzz. Jingjiu had disappeared. A streak of sword light flew toward the scorching Sun Gorge, which was hundreds of miles away. It was so fast that one couldn't even catch up with it with their eyes. Wherever the sword light passed, the ground cracked open. The cracks went deep into the ground, and a great amount of lava gushed out, turning into a beautiful waterfall of fire. Innumerable waterfalls of fire erupted along the large crack, as if they were escorting the sword light. It was a magnificent scene. Though the cold mountain looked desolate, it was different from the barren mountain outside Ijo. There were abundant fire sources under the ground, and all kinds of living beings lived there. A great amount of lava gushed out from the cracks in the ground. Countless fire beetles and hidden demons fled in all directions in terror. In the river of lava in the deep part of the ground, the golden carp tried his best to swim downward. He didn't stop until he reached the abyss. His eyes were full of fear, devoid of the dignity of the king of fire carps. Sensing the power of the earth-shaking sword will, he trembled like a sensei, and his tail slapped the huge transparent wall, making pa sounds. He was extremely scared. The whole of Chaotian had heard the sword chime. The mortals might think it was a distant lightning, but the cultivation practitioners were well aware of what it represented. The earth-shaking sword wielded by the immortal Lu Ci at the West Ocean had been spread all over the world, including all the details of it. The people of the mysterious dark sect had also heard the sword chime, but they didn't have enough time to associate it with the rumored sword. They were too close to the sword chime. They didn't even have the time to warn the others. The sword light had passed through the darkness of the night and arrived in front of the scorching sun gorge. Whoosh! Innumerable balls of fire rose up from all sides of the gorge, forming a powerful barrier. The surface of the barrier was extremely smooth, and countless white bones and twisted faces could be vaguely seen on it. It was unclear how many mortals had been sacrificed for it. This was the great formation of the mountain gate of the mysterious dark sect. This formation used the sun banner as its foundation and nurtured more than 40 streams of weeping ghosts, nourishing itself by absorbing the spiritual energy of the fire sources. It was indeed powerful. It managed to block the sword light for a moment. A moment later, hiss! A crack appeared on the surface of the barrier, and then it broke apart quickly, turning into the uncontrollable spiritual energy, drifting into heaven and earth along with those living souls that had been sacrificed. The sword light drifted into the barrier. Innumerable fine and deep cracks appeared on the hard stone walls on both sides of the gorge. These cracks were not caused by the sword light, but were caused by the accompanying sword wills. The surprised screams could be heard in the scorching sun gorge. The buildings were collapsing one after another, and the cliff rocks were falling down. The smoke and dust rose up. The sword light continued drifting in the gorge. All the magic treasures and demonic treasures would be cut into pieces once they encountered the sword light. The disciples of the mysterious dark sect were extremely terrified. They turned into wisps of black smoke and fled in all directions, but they fell down like raindrops. Fortunately, these regular disciples and the swordsmen in the elder state were not the target of the sword light. Many of them survived and hid underground. The sword light passed through the hard rocks soundlessly and arrived in the most secret manor cave. The elder of the 7th generation, Gao Ye, was extremely terrified. He reached out his hand to grab Su Chiga on the stone bed and used him as a shield, but he found that the sword light had already drifted past him. Wang Xiaoming's face was pale, the wildfire at the bottom of his eyes burning fiercely. The sun banner let out countless ghostly cries, wrapping a few thick layers around his body. The sword light disappeared. Countless glows suddenly appeared in the sun banner. This magic treasure of the deviant sects, whose offensive power could be ranked in the top 10 in the cultivation world, had been broken into pieces. Wang Xiaoming, wrapped in the sun banner, was in a worse state. His fresh blood shot out like arrows, dyeing the surface of the banner red instantly. The dreadful screams echoed in the manor cave. Wang Xiaoming rolled on the ground while wrapped in the broken sun banner, covering the ground with his blood. The sword light disappeared from the manor cave. It went to another secret manor cave to destroy the treasured demonic treasures of the mysterious dark sect over the years. Gao Ye was still holding Su Chiga's body, not daring to make a sound. The bloody man wrapped in the sun banner had stopped moving. Gao Ya's face grew paler. Su Chiga closed his eyes, as if he had given up all hope. Was this the rumored sword light? They had heard of the story of the West Ocean, and they had seen it with their own eyes that day. Faced with such a sword light, most of the things in the world had lost their original meaning, like schemes and willpower. This sword light shouldn't have killed all the disciples of the mysterious dark sect. Yet, the great formation of the mountain gate had been destroyed, and the sun banner had become a tattered shroud. If the orthodox sects like the Aoyama sect and the Zhongzhou school took the opportunity to attack them, wouldn't the mysterious dark sect be wiped out? On a distant peak, Su Zai looked in the direction of the scorching sun gorge, his green face reflecting the flames, looking rather eerie. It was hard to tell what he was feeling at the moment. As the Aoyama sect was dealing with the aftermath of the West Ocean, he didn't want to stay there any longer. He went back to the cold mountain overnight, ready to summon his former subordinate. With the promise of the Zhongzhou school, he was confident that he could take back the mysterious dark sect. Unexpectedly, the mysterious dark sect faced a calamity tonight. Su Zai was fully aware that this was not an undeserved calamity. The mysterious dark sect was a deviant sect to begin with, and the magic method they practiced was rather wicked and bizarre. Moreover, he played an important role in the Battle of the West Ocean, causing a great deal of harm to the Aoyama sect. Was this the punishment given to him by the Aoyama sect? That sword light was truly formidable, but it was also because it was too sharp and too fast that it gave the mysterious dark sect a chance to survive. It was easy for the sharpest flying sword to cut an object in half, but it was more difficult for it to cut all the tiny objects. It was not as good as a wildfire. After tonight, the mysterious dark sect would be destroyed, but many of those young disciples would survive. As long as the sparks were kept alive, they would become a prairie fire one day. Su Zai decided that he would gather the surviving disciples and leave this place as far as possible after that sword light had left. The only worry he had was that the Zhongzhou school might break their promise because they thought the mysterious dark sect was useless to them. Suddenly, his pupils shrank abruptly. A flash of broadsword light appeared in the north with booming sounds. The mountains shook and the starlight dodged. Nothing dared block its path. Seeing the broadsword light, Su Zai felt hopeless, his green face full of bewilderment and helplessness. He didn't need to worry that the Zhongzhou school would break their promise again, and he didn't need to feel lucky that some young disciples had survived. That night, the mysterious dark sect was destroyed. Even the powerful figures in the world would feel fearful when they saw that sword light, or they would try to avoid it. Yet, one or two of them didn't feel fearful at all, but felt even more heroic. The broadsword light coming from the north was one of them. Yet, it didn't come here to compete with the sword light, but rather to harmonize with it. This was the high mountain and flowing water. This was the Aoyama I've met. The broadsword light landed in the scorching sun gorge. The sword light was still drifting in the gorge. As soon as the golden wind and the jade dew met, an earth-shattering explosion occurred. There was a loud bang. The entire gorge left the ground and then fell down. All of them were dead. Gao Ya, Su Chiga, the elders and the disciples. Their great ambition had come to naught. The mysterious dark sect was gone. There was only one person in Chaotian who could wield a broadsword like this. The Broadsword King, Chao Yuan. This legend in the cultivation circle, who had guarded the wind and snow alone for many years, had been sitting in a small temple in White Town for many years. Seeing the sword wielded by the immortal Lu Ci that night, he was in a rare mood, so he wielded a broadsword from 1,000 miles away to liven things up. The sword light was gradually concealed in the high sky. Looking at the north, Lu Ci remarked, "Chao Yuan is indeed extraordinary." Yeah, Jing Jiu agreed. A few significant events had taken place in a few days, shocking the whole of Chaotian. The great Grandmaster of the Foggy Island was killed, The godly swordsman of West Ocean was exiled, and the Western Sea Sword School was destroyed. Soon after, the mysterious dark sect was destroyed as well. Nobody in the world could rival the immortal Lu Ci and the Broadsword King when they joined hands. To say nothing of the mysterious dark sect, even the deviant practitioners hiding in the cold mountain were affected, and hundreds of their swordsmen were killed. The disciples of the Windy Broadsword and the divine guards of the north entered the cold mountain at the same time, and began to wipe out the deviant practitioners. The deviant sects were on the decline to begin with. After this battle, they wouldn't be able to recover their strength in less than 1,000 years. But the shock wasn't over yet. A few days later, another peculiar event took place in Chaotian. The Muddy River was dyed red. It wasn't the section of the Muddy River in Shangzhou, Nanhezu and Yunyang City that was dyed red. It was the entire Muddy River within 10,000 miles that was dyed red. Many populace thought it was the omen of a disaster. They knelt down by the river bank in terror, kowtowing incessantly. The burning incense sticks could be seen everywhere. The Taoist temples and the Zen temples in various places were filled with incense stick. The Taoist priests and monks didn't know what had happened, feeling extremely uneasy. The Pure Heaven Bureau of the Imperial Court began to investigate the matter, and many orthodox cultivation practitioners began to search for the truth in the Muddy River. It was then that countless huge corpses floated up from the Muddy River one after another. They were all formidable demons like the Dace Devils. These demons had been driven by the underworld many years ago. They had passed through the huge whirlpool and then entered the river from the sea, hiding in the Muddy River. The orthodox cultivation sects hadn't been able to wipe them out even after many years, because these large demons hid very well or were very hard to kill. How could they all die in one night? According to the report of the Pure Heaven Bureau, the populace at different places on both banks of the Muddy River had seen a flash of light the night before the Muddy River turned red. As a result, the cultivation circle and the imperial court all learned that it was that sword light. It took the sword light one night to pass through the entire Muddy River from the West Ocean to the East Ocean. The cultivation circle was shocked speechless. Did the immortal Lu Ci intend to kill all the enemies of Aoyama? It was then that another shocking piece of news came out in Zhaoga City. The emperor issued a royal decree. Jing Yao became the crown prince. The emperor approved it. Chapter 5:15. When the divine emperor appointed Jing Yao as the crown prince, he also issued another imperial edict. The chief commander of the Pure Heaven Bureau, Zhang Ei, was ordered to investigate the assassination attempt on Zhao Liu outside the capital. In the end, the investigation led to the palace of Prince Jing Xian. It turned out that Prince Jing Xian had ordered the assassins of Bulo Lin to do such an evil deed. In fact, everybody had known about this a long time ago, but the imperial court had finally brought this matter to light, and they had even presented evidence that might be true or fabricated. As such, Prince Jing Xian couldn't stay in the palace of Prince Jing Xian any longer. He had to move to a new place even if he had to be put under house arrest. Prince Jing Xian was sent to the Guoqing Temple to become a monk to pray for the late emperor. The two royal decrees had caused an uproar in the world. Everybody knew that Prince Jing Yao was a disciple of Aoyama, and Prince Jing Xian had the backing of Zhongzhou School. The two of them had been fighting secretly in Zhaoga City for many years. These two royal decrees had forced Zhongzhou School to turn against each other. Would the two leaders of the orthodox sects start a war over the position of the emperor? It was then that the Cloud Dream Mountain suddenly received an order from the immortal Tan. Cloud Dream Mountain would be sealed off for 3 years. The No Mercy sect announced that their mountain would be sealed off a few years ago because Pei Baifa was killed by the godly swordsman of West Ocean. Their sect didn't have anyone in the heavenly arrival state to support them, so they had no choice but to seal off their mountain to protect themselves. Though the Zhongzhou school hadn't had a good time in the last few years, the immortals Tan and Bai were still at the top of the world, and their resources were still very strong. Why did they suddenly do this? The Cloud Dream Mountain was sealed off, and the officials of the Center sect who supported Prince Jing Xin didn't have a leader. They didn't know how to deal with the situation. In addition, the one cottage house represented by the Prime Minister had maintained an eerie silence. As a result, these two royal decrees were announced to the world without any obstruction. It was all because of that sword light. The sword light traveling in heaven and earth was unstoppable, and nobody dared look at it. It was said that the divine animal unicorn of Zhongzhou school had looked at the sword light from a distance, and almost had a mishap. The immortal Lu Ci could be said to be the strongest swordsman in the last 1,000 years, and he could even be ranked in the top 3 among the sect masters of Aoyama. People didn't understand why he didn't ascend now that he had reached such a state. The sound of the waves in the East Ocean was no different from that in the West Ocean. A group of carriages from Zhaoga City arrived in Machio. They didn't stay long before leaving again, heading for Shuiyu Nunnery by the seashore. Jingjiu only withdrew his gaze after the convoy entered the nunnery. "This situation is a little awkward," Lu Ci said. "Prince Jing Xin was in that carriage. The emperor's decree was for him to go to the Guoqing temple to shave his hair and become a monk. In the future, he would accompany the ancient Buddha and listen to sutras. Unexpectedly, the Guoqing temple refused to accept him. Given the close relationship between the Guoqing temple and the Jing imperial family, for them to do this, it could only be said that Zen master held a great grudge against Lu Ci for letting Taiping Zhenren go. The awkwardness Lu Ci was referring to was the fact that Jing Xin was forced to go to a nunnery to become a monk, and that he felt guilty towards Zen master. Jingjiu said, "To be a monk is not to die. It's always a problem." The imperial edict had already been announced to the world. It was believed that in a few years, Jing Yao would become the only crown prince in the hearts of the people. The problem was that on that day, Zhongzhou school would definitely do something. As long as Jing Xin was alive, he would definitely be pushed out by those people. Lu Ci knew that he could not explain the relationship between father and son to him. He walked to the edge of the cliff and looked down into the deep underground, saying, "I haven't been there yet. This is the heavenly well by the East Sea. You can enter the netherworld by jumping into it if you can survive." The underworld was just a direction of cold darkness. It was not the destination of the soul as in the legends. If one died, they would not go there, and no one knew where they would go. The pursuit of cultivators was to never come into contact with this problem. Jingjiu said, "It's a bitter place that doesn't see the light of day, and there's not much scenery either. It's fine if we don't go." Lu Ci said, "Then there's another place worth visiting." What he referred to was the Snowland, where the life forms of the highest state in Chaotian lived, the greatest threat to the human race. "Calm down," said Jingjiu. After leaving the heavenly well and arriving above the clouds on the East Sea, Lu Ci still didn't give up the idea. The last sword landing on the Snowland was the best outcome for the human cultivation practitioners. "You've seen Chao Yuan's broadsword," he said. "If he helps me, it's not impossible." "No," said Jingjiu. Lu Ci sighed and said, "I'm leaving then." He was to leave Chaotian and travel to the alien land. As for the situation in Chaotian, nobody would dare do anything to him as long as he was still alive. It didn't matter if he stayed here or not. The people of Chaotian would know when he left for real. Jingjiu shot a glance at the white cloud under his feet and asked, "Are you sure you don't need to bring the sword of the universe with you?" It was very difficult to temper one's own flying sword. It was even more troublesome to transfer the flying swords among the swordsmen. Jingjiu was the only exception. He had a way to let others use his own sword, and he could also take someone else's sword for his own use. For instance, the thoughtless sword should be shared by him and Zhao Lei. Lu Xi had only tempered one sword all his life, and he had only used it a few days ago. Of course, he was able to wield it easily. "Are you sure you don't want to go with me?" he asked. "I've been to all those places," said Jingjiu. "It's too boring." Traveling was a pleasant thing for many people, but it might be interesting for Jingjiu the first time. It would be a waste of time to go again after having been there once. Glancing at the white cloud under his feet, Jingjiu couldn't help but remark, "The sword cloud is really slow." Lu Xi was annoyed, exclaiming, "Do you know what traveling is? Traveling on the cloud, of course." Having said that, he leapt up on the cloud, heading toward the deep part of the East Sea. The sunlight shone on the cloud, forming a golden border. Ching-er flew out and landed on Lu Xi's shoulder, pointing to the distant horizon, saying something. Jingjiu watched in silence. He didn't turn around and leave until the cloud disappeared into the horizon. Jingjiu went to Shuiyu Nunnery to check on Guodong, who was still asleep. He didn't go to see Jing Xian, nor did he go to the Guoqing temple. He returned to Aoyama. The desolate sword light illuminated the peak of Shinma Peak. 3 people and a cat came out to greet him. Gu Qing knew that something significant must have happened, so he wanted to come back. But Zhao Lei didn't agree because Jing Yao had just been appointed as the crown prince, and there were many things to deal with in Zhaoga City. Yuan Chu and Ping Yongka returned to the Grand Hall obediently after bowing to them. Gu Qing was not here, but he had set up a rule that the disciples had to stay away from the 2 masters when they wanted to talk. The white cat was not a disciple, and he thought that he had won some honor this time, so he didn't hide. He crouched by the cliff's edge and pricked up his ears to listen. The bamboo chair was under the snow girl. Lu Shui had promised to make a new one, but it hadn't been delivered yet. Jingjiu was too lazy to do it, so he sat by the cliff's edge. It was probably because he had seen Lu Xi sit like this many times. Yet, his legs were not as long as Lu Xi's, so he could only step on the ocean of clouds, unable to step on the waves. Zhao Lei sat by Jingjiu's side. Jingjiu said, "That devil is Lu Xi." Back at the West Ocean, Lu Xi stood in front of Taiping Jinren and withdrew the heavenly thunders with his palm that covered the sky. Zhao Lei had guessed the answer at the time. "Does the sect master support Taiping Jinren?" she asked. Jingjiu said, "No. Even his most loyal subordinates don't support him, including those in the underworld, because he is crazy." "What does Taiping Jinren want to do?" asked Zhao Lei. Jingjiu said, "He wants to kill all the mortals and create a world where only the cultivation practitioners live." Hearing this answer, Zhao Lei was startled. She had guessed many times that Taiping Jinren wanted to do something evil that the whole world couldn't tolerate, but she didn't expect him to have such a bizarre, evil, and even absurd idea. The emperor and royal concubine, who had a similar conversation a few days ago in the royal palace of Zhaoga City. Royal concubine whose reaction at the time was that it was impossible. Zhao Lei didn't say it out loud, because she was fully aware that the cultivation sects could easily kill all the mortals if they went crazy. The question was, why would they want to do so? The cultivation practitioners were 1 in 1,000, or even 1 in 10,000. If there weren't enough humans, the cultivation world wouldn't be able to sustain itself, let alone kill all the mortals. Wouldn't the entire human race be wiped out? In addition to this most important issue, there were other issues that Zhao Lei couldn't solve. "You said that the cultivation practitioners are taken care of by the mortals," she said. Jingjiu said, "He doesn't think so. He doesn't think it's the mortals who take care of the cultivation practitioners. On the contrary, it's the cultivation practitioners who provide jobs for the mortals and take care of them." Zhao Lei said, "Without mortals, who would farm, mine, and collect ocean pearls? Who would provide the resources needed by the cultivation practitioners?" Jingjiu shot her a glance. "Without the butcher, would you still want to eat meat? Without rice, would you like to eat minced meat? Zhao Lei realized that she was wrong. Like all the other cultivation practitioners, they were used to being taken care of by the mortals, so they took it as a matter of course. Without mortals, the cultivation practitioners could farm, mine, collect ocean pearls, and grow medicine herbs by themselves. Moreover, the cultivation practitioners had the ability to summon wind and rain, so they could do everything much more efficiently than the mortals. But there was another problem. Most of the cultivation practitioners were proud and arrogant. They were all people who pursued the Tao wholeheartedly, so why would they be willing to do those things? Do farmers farm because they want to farm? Did the miners dig in the dark underground because they liked to mine? See women. Jingju thought of Lu Xi and didn't continue, but his meaning was clear. Even if the cultivation practitioners didn't want to do it, there would be an invisible force that forced them to do it. That force came from the fear of death and the need to be stronger. Zhao Lei completely understood. It would be a completely new world, but it wouldn't be any different from the old world. The cultivation practitioners would have different positions in that world according to their talents and abilities. They would still have different levels, and they would still draw their swords to the weaker ones. The only difference from the current world was that the people at the bottom were much stronger. But in this way, the power of the new world would at least far surpass that of the current world. Zhao Lei suddenly said, "There are too few cultivation practitioners." This sentence sounded powerful, but it was actually a bit powerless. Jingju knew that she also had an answer, but he still said, "So he thinks that the most important thing for the cultivation practitioners is to have children." Back then, he had told Zhao Lei that Tai Pingzhenren would have already planted children in the world if it wasn't for the fact that he couldn't accept the existence of a bloodline similar to his own. Zhao Lei thought of another problem. If the cultivation practitioners became cultivation partners, the offspring they gave birth to would most likely have the spirit bone and Tao heart and be gifted in cultivation, but there was also a chance that they would give birth to mortals. What about the offspring who couldn't cultivate? Should they all be killed? This inference made her feel a bit cold and extremely uncomfortable. That was something that the deviant path sects and even the bloody demon church wouldn't do. No wonder everyone wanted Taiping dead. He thinks that this is the price to pay for evolution. Even though the cultivation practitioners originated from mortals, they are two different kinds of life forms. Jingju said, "If the cultivation practitioners want to go further, they should go into battle lightly and throw away all the burdens of the old days." Zhao Lei retracted her legs and hugged her knees. She said in a low voice, "But the world is only so big. Even if the world of the cultivation practitioners is powerful, even if they occupy all the alien lands, what can they do? Since it is meaningless, why does he insist on making our world stronger?" Jingju said, "Because our world is not the only thing he cares about." Zhao Lei followed his line of sight and looked up at the sky. The clouds high up in the sky fell on her clear black and white eyes, casting a faint shadow over them. Chapter 5:16. There was another world up in the sky. The people living on Chaotian had many conjectures about that world, but they had gradually faded away as time passed. An ascendant could only appear once every 1,000 years. Even if they had a yearning for it, how long could they hold on to it? Since they couldn't reach the other side, even if it was the fairy realm, they didn't need to care about it. However, for a talented cultivation practitioner like Zhao Lei, whose goal was to seek the Tao and ascend, they would of course think about what was in that world. This was why she couldn't understand Tai Pingzhenren. The goal of the cultivation practitioners was longevity and ascension. Why did an unparalleled figure like Tai Pingzhenren set his sights on the mortal world? He had a strong sense of crisis, feeling that the world was full of competition and danger. He also had a strong sense of responsibility, believing that he should lead the whole world forward. As such, his goal was different from other cultivation practitioners. Jingjiu continued. He wanted to break the rules of this world and lead all the cultivation practitioners to leave it. The magnificent scene appeared in front of Zhao Lei's eyes. She remained silent for a long time due to the shock. "Is this what it means for everyone to ascend?" she asked softly. "That's right. On the surface, it looks like what the Zen sect said about everyone becoming a Buddha." Jingjiu continued. He had been the chief monk of the Guoqing temple and learned the Buddhist methods well. He might have been influenced by it. Zhao Lei pressed. "Do you think it's impossible for him to achieve what he wants?" Jingjiu said straightforwardly, "I don't know. I just don't like the things he has to do in order to achieve his goal." He had stayed behind closed doors in Shangda Peak and Shinma Peak in his previous life, and seldom left Aoyama. However, Lu Xi, Yuan Qijing and Ada were all aware that he was not afraid of killing people. He had seen Lien Sandui kill people, but he had never seen anyone kill people like that. To achieve his goal, Taiping could kill anyone, even his own people. The flood was surging. His royal brother died. Zen Master was forced to reincarnate. The sword hid everywhere in Aoyama like a pitiful monkey. Most importantly, he didn't agree with that idea. The relationship between the cultivation practitioners and the mortals was never like that between herdsmen and sheep. He had told Zhao Lei in Zhaoga City. Zhao Lei must have thought of that sentence and said, "You are right." He came to a conclusion. From that moment on, they never discussed this issue again. The singing suddenly came from Qingrong Peak on the other side of the cliff. Jingjiu's expression changed slightly. He was about to get up and leave when he decided to stay. The singing was a little sad and melancholic. Through the clouds, one could vaguely see the scene on the other side. Nan Wang stood under the flowering tree and drank. She had just started drinking and was not drunk yet. Jingjiu suddenly said, if nothing unexpected happened back then, she should be Lu Xi's cultivation companion. Somewhat surprised, Zhao Lei asked, and then? Jingjiu said, she doesn't like him. Zhao Lei thought to herself, so you're the accident? She asked, and then? Boring, said Jingjiu. Zhao Lei thought for a moment and said, yes. The Shangda Peak was covered with a thick layer of snow. The sounds of coughing could be heard once in a while in the manor cave. The snow on the cliffs shook along with the coughing, turning into a small avalanche. Qi Yan pulled back his gaze from the broken arm and looked at the manor cave, his eyes full of worry. Nan Chu's sword was indeed formidable. Qi Yan had one of his arms cut off before he could resist it, and Duan Liantian was killed. The sword Justice was the target of Nan Chu's sneak attack, and he exchanged blows with Nan Chu after being severely wounded, so he must have been severely wounded. The coughing suddenly stopped, and Yuan Qijing walked out from the manor cave. Qi Yan was startled, wondering where Yuan Qijing was going when he hadn't recovered from his severe wound. Yuan Qijing waved his hand to indicate that he didn't need to say anything. He stepped on the 3-foot sword and left the Shangda Peak. The thick fog was still on the stone beam between Shirui Peak and Shilai Peak, but the shadow of the dark phoenix was nowhere to be seen. The clouds and fog suddenly dispersed, and Yuan Qijing landed on the stone beam along with the snowflake. Fang Jingtian walked out from the deep end of the fog. Yuan Qijing looked at Jingjiu in silence, saying nothing. Fang Jingtian didn't say anything either, his white eyebrows ruffling slightly. Yuan Qijing shook his head while looking at Jingjiu in silence. Fang Jingtian nodded after a long moment of silence. Jingjiu stayed behind closed doors from that moment on. He wasn't allowed to come out without permission. There was a small village outside Nanhua City. There was nothing special about this village. Like other small villages, one could always see old men sunbathing and gossiping at the entrance of the village. The sun was setting. An old man with sparse hair and a red nose returned to his small courtyard with the help of a walking stick. A golden rooster was sitting on the millstone in the courtyard. His long tail looked less devilish and formidable because of the severe damage. It looked a bit comical. Insan pushed open the door and walked out. He looked at the setting sun in the distance with narrowed eyes, saying, "Another day has passed." The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect said while rubbing his nose, "Immortal, there has to be an explanation for this matter. Those swordsmen of Aoyama who couldn't restrain themselves played an important role in Insan's escape from the West Ocean, but the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect was the most important one. He had withstood a sword wielded by the godly swordsmen of West Ocean and fought head-on with the dragon-tail inkstone of Yamatsai, demonstrating his profound cultivation state. Like the white cat on the top of the Shinma Peak, the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect thought he was qualified to ask for something. Insan patted his shoulder and said, "I'll find an opportunity to vent your anger for you." The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect's nose became redder, indicating that he was extremely angry. "The mysterious dark sect is gone. What's the point of venting my anger?" Insan didn't heed him. He walked to the millstone and checked the tail of the golden rooster, saying, "It can be raised." The golden rooster spoke in human language, "Immortal, the life plate is in that bastard's hands. No matter what he is, I'm always uneasy." Insan comforted her, "Don't be afraid. He didn't touch you this time, so he won't touch you again." A horse carriage arrived in front of the small courtyard. A very cute little boy was sent in. Knowing that it was a letter, the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect asked, "What has happened?" The little boy was only 3 or 4 years old. His eyes were innocent and clean, and he was extremely ignorant. "This is a blank piece of paper." Insan stroked the boy's head and said with a smile, "I'll teach him well for a few years, and he'll be able to write a great essay in 4 years. The great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect couldn't stand the way he talked, so he turned around and headed for the kitchen. He came to the stove and looked at the hoof that was as steady as a mountain in the boiling soup. He suddenly fell silent. Whether it was a piece of wood or a pig's trotters, after being cooked for a long time, they would eventually break down. There were more and more rotting marks on the spiritual master's body, and he could collapse at any time. "What are you going to do without the first child sword?" Jingjiu left the Shinma Peak and went to the sword jail. He came to a dry and clean hall after passing through the passage full of bloody and dirty energy. He looked at the other passage, which was even deeper and gloomier. At the end of the passage was the cell, where the snow girl was locked. The passage was filled with the sword wills he had deployed, which were swift and powerful, and nobody could break them. Sensing Jingjiu's arrival, the snow girl turned her head to look at the door of the cell. Separated by layers of sword wills and the door, Jingjiu and the snow girl looked at each other quietly, neither of them saying anything. The wind came from 2 places. The wind from the courtyard of the Shangda Peak was a bit cold, and the wind from the Hermit Peaks was a bit warm. The dust was stirred up, drifting between the 2 of them. After a long while, Jingjiu turned around and left. In the cell, the snow girl pulled back her line of sight, and was about to continue looking at the solitary peak of the snowy mountain. That was her beautiful land and mountains. Jingjiu suddenly stopped short and asked, "That chair, if you think it's hard, can I change it for you?" The snow girl groaned twice. The first sound indicated that she didn't think it was hard, and the second sound indicated that she didn't want it. There was a Dao gate at the end of the sword jail, outside of which was a patch of lethal fog, and there were many mountain peaks on the other side of the fog. This place was the rumored Hermit Peaks of Aoyama. In addition to those elders waiting for their deaths, a few swordsmen of various peaks were imprisoned here because they wanted to break through the cultivation state. There were other passages to leave the Hermit Peak. Lu Shui had taken one of them. Nobody knew about it except for Jingjiu, Lu Ci, Yuan Qijing and the dead dog, not even Lu Ada. Besides the Tianguang Peak, there was no other place in the world where the hermit peaks could be seen. It was not because of the fog and clouds enshrouding the peaks, but because of the sword formation of Aoyama. As he passed by a peak, Jingjiu took a look at it. Fang Jingtian stayed behind closed doors here. It didn't take long before Jingjiu arrived in front of a peak. He stepped on the cloud and found the manor cave. He pushed open the door and entered after taking a look at the emerald on the cliff. Tong Yen lifted her head, feeling a bit surprised. The hermit peaks were the best place to hide a person in Aoyama so that the Zhongzhou school wouldn't know anything about him. "What do you want to give me?" asked Jingjiu. Tong Yen put the go piece in her hand back on the table and said, "I don't understand what you mean." She had to pay a price for joining Aoyama, which was probably to prove her loyalty. But was the green sky mirror not enough? "I want the first child sword," said Jingjiu. "First of all, I wish the girls a happy holiday. Today is Black Songsong's birthday, which was confirmed yesterday. I wish her in the book a happy birthday, and to get back her cooking skills as soon as possible. Today is the 2nd day of the 2nd month, when the dragon raises its head. I think of the 3rd day of the 3rd month in the year of the Qing dynasty again. Finally, I wish Nan Wang a happy drinking session and not to remember the sad events of the past." Chapter 5:17. The sword boat of Aoyama on Bihu Peak had been anchored at the West Ocean for many days. Chen Yutian was a cautious and meticulous person, so he wouldn't miss anything. He had indeed found many magic treasures of the Western Sea Sword School, but he hadn't found the first child sword. It was evident that something was wrong. "I don't know how many days you have been hiding on that island, and I don't know what method you used to deceive Qing, but I know it's in your hands." Jingjiu continued, "If Bai Jinren doesn't investigate it for a while, he will remember it sooner or later. Will you give it to him or not? So you simply ran away." This was a provocative statement, and a malicious conjecture. Tong Yen pulled back her gaze and resumed playing chess, saying nothing. "That sword is mine. It has always been mine," said Jingjiu. "Many years ago, the immortal Daoyuan brought Jingjiu to Aoyama from Zhaoga City. A few years later, the immortal Daoyuan was killed by Nan Chu's sneak attack. Before his death, he cut down Nan Chu's Dao tree and snatched the first child sword, and gave it to Jingjiu. 300 years ago, Jingjiu gave it to the new emperor, who had just lost his father, as a consolation to celebrate his ascension to the throne a few years ago. Jingjiu was right. The first child sword had always been his. Now that Nan Chu was dead, it should be his even more. If it were before, when the first child sword still had a mark on it, Jingjiu wouldn't have to ask Tong Yen. However, the first child sword had been tempered once when Pei Baifa killed Shiwang's son, and the mark had disappeared. Tong Yen lifted her head and asked Jingjiu, perhaps because she had sensed the attitude in Jingjiu's calm tone. "What's in it for me?" Jingjiu said, "You can choose any of the secret swords of the 9 peaks." "I'm cultivating the magic methods," said Tong Yen. The best magic methods in the world were all in the Zhongzhou school, which the Aoyama sect admitted as well. Tong Yen continued, "Now that I'm a disciple of Aoyama, shouldn't I get the treatment I deserve?" Haizhou City was extremely desolate at the moment. There were few pedestrians on the streets, and the hot pot restaurant where Yin San and the great grandmaster of the mysterious dark sect had been closed. Although the war between the cultivation sects took place in the sky, the aftermath was enough to change many things in the human world. Chen Yutian sat on the city tower and frowned slightly when he saw the box that his disciple had sent over. There was a huge ocean pearl in the box, and it was extremely precious. However, he still could not understand why the faction valued it so much that they wanted him to personally send it back to Aoyama. It was found in the ruins of the Western Sea Sword School by the disciples of Bihu Peak. After it was numbered, it was placed in the sword boat, and it was not taken out until now. Since he couldn't figure it out, he stopped thinking about it. Chen Yutian rode on his sword and flew up. This time, the ocean pearl did not need to travel thousands of miles, nor did it need to be hidden in the belly of a fish, and then sent into Aoyama by the Gu clan. A few days later, the box containing the ocean pearl returned to Aoyama. It was brought back to Shima Peak by Yuan Chu after a turn at the Shanghai Peak. Jingjiu sat by the cliff's edge and took over the box. He opened it under the curious gazes of Yuan Chu and Ping Yongka. Looking at the large ocean pearl emitting a gloomy and cold glow in the box and sensing the energy of heaven and earth contained in it, Ping Yongjia couldn't help but feel moved. Looking at the amulets carved on the box, Ping Yongjia remarked sentimentally, "Fortunately, there is a formation on this box. Otherwise, the demons and the heretical sects would fight for it if the energy of heaven and earth leaked out." Yuan Chu glanced at him mockingly and said, "It was sent back by Senior Master Chen Yutian in person. Who would dare to have any wild thoughts about it?" The white cat glanced at him mockingly, thinking, "What do you know?" Jingjiu took out the ocean pearl and tossed it to the white cat to play with. He exerted some force with his left hand, and the sword wills burst out, breaking the formation attached to the box. Crack! The wooden box broke into pieces, exposing a flying sword hidden inside. Jingjiu picked up the flying sword and sensed the chilly sensation coming from the sword, saying, "Tong Yan's skill in the formation is quite good." This box had been hidden in the treasure room on Xiaoming Island the entire time. As it could evade Yin San's perception, the formation attached to it was not only good, but also very good. It wasn't until now that Yuan Chu and Ping Yongka realized what was going on. Looking at the obviously extraordinary flying sword, they were stunned, asking, "What kind of sword is this?" "The first child sword," replied Jingjiu. Hearing this answer, Yuan Chu and Ping Yongka were even more shocked. The white cat placed the ocean pearl in a crack by the cliff's edge and put cold cicada on it. The surface of the ocean pearl was very smooth, so cold cicada had a hard time standing on it. It kept sliding down. Every time it was about to fall to the bottom, the white cat would reach out his paw to push it back. "Whom are you going to give this sword to?" asked Zhao Lei. Back in Guiyun City, she had used this flying sword to pierce through Lo Huainan's body, so she had a deep impression of it. Hearing this, the white cat turned his head to look at Cold Cicada. "Pa!" Cold Cicada fell to the ground, its belly facing up. This was the answer that everybody was curious about. The thoughtless sword was given to Zhao Lei. The lone sword was on Lu Shisui's side, and the West Ocean's side had made it clear. The sword of the universe was left for Gu Qing. A cat didn't use a sword. Yuan Chu and Ping Yongka were the only two people left on the Shima Peak. Thinking of a possibility, the two of them eyed each other and saw the ecstasy in each other's eyes. Soon, a bucket of cold water was poured on them. "It's not for you," said Jingjiu. Yuan Chu and Ping Yongka uttered, "Oh, honestly," not feeling disappointed. Jingjiu waved his hand to signal for them to leave. Yuan Chu and Ping Yongka walked toward the Taoist hall, talking to each other in a low voice. Sitting by the cliff's edge, Jingjiu looked at the distant horizon, swinging his feet. However, his legs weren't long enough, so he couldn't touch the ocean of clouds. "At least you have a better eye for choosing disciples than Tai Pingzhenren. There's nothing to be unhappy about." The white cat comforted Jingjiu through his spiritual awareness. Jingjiu didn't pay any attention to the cat. He was still looking at the horizon in silence. It was quiet by the cliff's edge. Silence usually meant depression. Cold Cicada rubbed its limbs gingerly, making a faint sound, reminding the others that it was still facing up. It could turn itself over, but it wasn't sure if it should show its belly to make Jingjiu happy, so it asked for permission. The white cat turned it over with his paw, wondering why it was acting like this since it was not a cat. Everybody could tell that Jingjiu was in a bad mood, and they knew the reason, but they couldn't comfort him. "Don't feel bad. Looking at the part of Jingju's earlobe that had been cut off by Nan Chu, the White Cat said, "You have a pair of protruding ears anyway. It's better to cut off a part of that ear to make it symmetrical." The cat thought that it was impossible for him to cut it off, unless Jingju did it himself, or asked Zhao Liu to pull it off every day. As the cat was thinking of this, Zhao Liu raised her hand and rubbed Jingju's damaged earlobe gently. Her black and white eyes were not as cold as usual, but full of heartache. What she felt heartache for was not the earlobe, but something else. The expression on Jingju's face grew softer, probably because he felt comfortable being rubbed. Jingju reached out his hand and rubbed the White Cat's head. The White Cat felt comfortable as well. He reached out his paw and pulled Cold Cicada into his bosom. The gentle wind blew over the cliff. The ocean of clouds rippled even though no feet could reach into the cliff. "I'm going to stay behind closed doors," said Jingju. Zhao Liu knew why Jingju wanted to stay behind closed doors, saying, "Me too." Fang Jingtian had already started to stay behind closed doors before the people of Shenma Peak started to stay behind closed doors. He was already in the upper limit of the Broken Sea state, and had a chance to enter the Heavenly Arrival state. If he stayed behind closed doors to break through the Heavenly Arrival state, nobody could tell when he would come out. The disciples of Shilai Peak were quite expectant, but the elders of Shilai Peak, who knew the inside story, remained silent. Soon after, Guangyu and Jinren started to stay behind closed doors, as did the peak master of Yunxing, and the swordsmen of other peaks. Guananshan and the others of Liangwang Peak had also started to stay behind closed doors. In the end, even Nan Wang and those female disciples of Qingrong Peak had started to stay behind closed doors. Everyone understood why this was the case. The current Aoyama sect could be said to be invincible in the world, but the sky was still covered by a layer of shadow. The spring rain would fall one day. Nan Wang stayed behind closed doors, and Qingrong Peak didn't pursue the summer thunder, autumn wind, winter snow, or the spring rain anymore. The great formation of Aoyama was fully activated, which was no different from sealing off the mountain. The peaks were unusually quiet, but they were not like graves, because they were not deathly still. A force was slowly accumulating in the deep end of the silence. 2 years later, in the middle of summer, Jingjiu walked out of his manor cave. According to the habit of staying behind closed doors at Shenma Peak, Zhao Liu, Yuan Chu, and Ping Yongka should have woken up by now, but Jingjiu had something to do by himself this time, so he didn't disturb them. He spread out his sword discernment to check the situation in the peak. The monkeys had welcomed some new lives, and some old people had been sent away, but the horse grazing on the slope was still in high spirits. The White Cat was sleepy by the cliff's edge, and Cold Cicada was dozing off on his head. The large ocean pearl had rolled down to somewhere at the bottom of the cliff. Yuan Chu was still in the process of breaking through the free travel state, and Ping Yongka's cultivation state was even lower, but he had improved so quickly without a sword. His talent was indeed outstanding. His sword discernment reached the deep end of the manor cave, and he found that Zhao Liu had abundant spiritual energy and restrained sword wills, indicating that she was at the critical moment of breaking through the upper state of the free travel. He was a bit surprised. Back when she was pursuing Tai Pingjinren at the Guoqing Temple, she had broken through the free travel state by force. How many years had passed since then? Zhuoruzhui was probably the only person in the Aoyama sect who had such a talent. Zhuoruzhui had fought many battles in the Dao competition, and his sword wills had become sharper. He was on the verge of crossing the threshold in recent years. It was unclear whether Lu Shisui would catch up with them after his internal injury was cured in Yamatsai. Thinking that these young people were so diligent in their cultivation and had improved so quickly, Jingjiu thought he should make use of the time to break through the new state. He had something to do before breaking through the new state. Jingjiu went to the Shangda Peak and landed at the bottom of the well along with the sunlight. The dead dog opened his eyes and looked at him, a hint of appreciation in his eyes. Jingjiu nodded to the dead dog and walked into the deep end of the sword jail. Jingjiu and the snow girl in the cell stared at each other for a while through the passageway, layers of sword wills, and the door. Next, he went to the hermit peaks and ascertained that Fang Jingtian was behind closed doors and hadn't been released by the dead dog in secret, and nothing unusual had happened to him. To his surprise, he found that Tong Yen, who was also behind closed doors, also showed a sign of breaking through the new state. The Aoyama sect didn't have the help of the magic methods of the Cloud Dream Mountain, and they didn't have any suitable magic pills, but under the circumstances, Tong Yan's cultivation speed didn't slow down at all. Jingjiu left the hermit peaks and returned the way he had come. Yuan Qijing was waiting for him by the well. "Have you recovered from your injury?" asked Jingjiu. Yuan Qijing didn't pay any attention to him. A figure in the heavenly arrival state, even if he was severely wounded by Nanchu's sneak attack, could be cured after staying behind closed doors for 2 years as long as his Dao tree was still standing. His line of sight fell on Jingjiu as he said, "Yes. I've always been able to do it," said Jingjiu. Yuan Qijing sneered once. Jingjiu was aware that he was not in a good mood. Any cultivation practitioner would feel a sense of defeat when they saw Jingjiu's cultivation speed. Even someone like Yuan Qijing, who had witnessed it twice, couldn't understand it. He really couldn't understand it. Cultivation wasn't something that could be done better just because you were familiar with it. How could it be possible to be faster every time? Chapter 518. Jingjiu could understand Yuan Qijing's frustration, just like he could understand everybody else. If it were before, Jingjiu would have ignored him, but he decided to comfort him since Yuan Qijing had dealt with Fang Jingtian decisively. "You've grown stronger," Jingjiu said to Yuan Qijing. This was a high compliment. Yuan Qijing didn't feel defeated after being sneak attacked and wounded by Nanchu. Instead, he had grown stronger. For a figure in the heavenly arrival state, it was very difficult for him to improve even one step further. "When I'm old and on the verge of death, it's easier for me to see things through, so I'm stronger." Yuan Qijing went on, "According to the mortals, this is the last radiance of the setting sun." "Don't say such inauspicious words," said Jingjiu. Yuan Qijing intended to ask him why he had come out from behind closed doors in advance since he still had more than a year to live, but he shut his mouth after hearing Jingjiu's request. "Who will go to the Clean Heart meeting?" asked Jingjiu. According to what Sensei had said years ago, the Clean Heart meeting of the Platonist sect should be held around this time. The birthday of the Grandmaster was not important, nor were those bells of high state at the Clean Heart meeting. What mattered most was who would be the leader of the Platonist sect in the future. The current sect master of the Platonist sect was the mother of Sensei and the daughter-in-law of the Grandmaster. The two of them had been competing openly and covertly for many years. The influence of the Grandmaster was much more powerful. The current sect master had relied on the Aoyama sect to survive until now. The intention of holding the Clean Heart meeting was obvious. The Grandmaster knew that she didn't have much time left, so she wanted to solve the problem once and for all. "He Bumu of Shuriwe Peak," said Yuan Qijing. Jingjiu uttered to express his puzzlement. Yuan Qijing glanced at Jingjiu and said, "He is the elder, he whom you met at the inherited sword competition." Jingjiu thought about it and remembered that little he was in the initial state of the Broken Sea. "A bit low," he said. Hibumu was merely a regular elder of Shuriwe Peak, and he represented Aoyama at the Clean Heart meeting. His cultivation state and status were both low. "They are all in seclusion," said Yuan Qijing. It was Nan Wang who had often represented the Aoyama sect in public, no matter if it was the plum meeting or the Dao competition. It was because she liked the crowds and didn't practice diligently. Now that even she was in seclusion, Aoyama really couldn't find a suitable partner. The entire cultivation world was waiting for the spring rain. the Aoyama sect would definitely not be in the mood to care about what was happening outside the mountain. For many people, it was indeed a good opportunity. However, when the Grand Master decided to hold the Clean Heart meeting, the incident in West Ocean hadn't happened yet. What did this mean? Jingjiu said, "She has an agreement with the Cloud Dream Mountain." There was still 1 year left before the Zhongzhou school closed its mountain. However, Old Lady was dying and could not wait any longer. Yuan Qijing said expressionlessly, "Why don't you go?" Jingjiu said, "Okay." Yuan Qijing was stunned. Jingjiu continued, "I'll go by myself. Don't tell anyone." After saying this, he walked out of the cave. Yuan Qijing came back to his senses and asked, "Where are you going?" Jingjiu said, "I'm going to the other peaks to have a look." Yuan Qijing didn't say anything more. Seeing Jingjiu's figure disappearing into the clouds and fog, he felt gratified that Jingjiu had changed a lot. In fact, he had higher expectations of this senior master than anybody else. It was the same back then, and it was the same now. The cultivation world said that he didn't like this senior master because he was too lazy and didn't care about anything. Helping Aoyama with some affairs didn't affect his cultivation. Just like now, you are still so lazy, but at least you are willing to do something. Is it affecting your cultivation? Thinking of the speed of cultivation, Jingjiu couldn't help but sneer, thinking that it was unreasonable. Jingjiu went to Yunxing Peak. The Sword Peak was still as desolate and cold as before. He couldn't see any life except for the iron eagles. He noticed a dozen flying swords among the peaks, some of which were broken. They should be the flying swords of the disciples who had died in the Battle of the West Ocean. Then, he went to Shuriwe Peak, to the Medicine Garden and the Magic Pill House. He wasn't good at these things, but he thought everything was fine when he saw the medicinal plants didn't lack water and were growing like cabbages, and the fire in the magic pill furnace was still burning. He didn't go to Shilai Peak. He had read those books and records, and they wouldn't fly away on their own, so those personal records weren't important. He didn't go to Liangwang Peak either, because he had moved all the good stuff there to Shenma Peak. The only thing left was the smell of the hot blood and sweat of those young disciples. What could he do there? It was true that he was inspecting Aoyama, like a lion inspecting his territory. He had done something similar a few years ago, confirming that Aoyama was his own Aoyama. But he didn't inspect it so carefully that time, so he didn't care about these details. When his big brother and Lu Ci were the sect masters, they would take care of these matters. All he needed to do was cultivation, and he didn't need to worry about anything else. There were too many things to do in this life, and it was a bit hard. With this thought in mind, Jingjiu landed by the lakeside on the top of Bihu Peak. The forbidding formation on the top of Bihu Peak had no effect on him with the bamboo board in his hand, and nobody could see him. He walked over the surface of the lake with the gentle breeze, his white robe fluttering. He covered a distance of 1,000 feet with each step, looking like a ferryman. There was a silvery beach on the other side of the lake, and a palace exuding a gloomy and cold energy was in front of him. Jingjiu walked to the front of the palace. There were no footprints or water stains on the beach. Hundreds of wild cats in the trees and in the bushes were watching him cautiously and anxiously. A few bold wild cats ran out and approached him cautiously. It was unclear if they had ascertained his identity or smelled the cat odor on him. Judging from the situation, these wild cats wanted to rub against his feet to show their submission and intimacy, and at the same time get some fairy energy. "No," said Jingjiu. Those wild cats didn't dare move forward. They crouched on the ground or lay on their sides or bared their bellies, pretending to be obedient. Jingjiu walked into the palace, and went straight to the deep part of the green stone formation without even taking a look at the porcelain bottles on the shelves. The green stone formation sensed his presence and started to rotate. A stone platform grew up from the ground, on which a few porcelain plates were placed, with a few pieces of blackened wood on the plates. These were the precious treasures of Aoyama, the Thunder Soul Wood. Looking at the 5 matured Thunder Soul Woods, Jingjiu remained silent for a long time. Even if the first child's sword didn't work, he could always use another sacrificial body. Why was he so persistent? He wasn't thinking about the problem for his big brother. He was thinking about the conversation he had with Lu Ci. Jingjiu picked up a new piece of Thunder Soul Wood. This piece of Thunder Soul Wood was brought back by the godly boat from the Punglai Island more than 100 years ago. It was still more than 300 years before it matured, and it needed a large amount of the power of thunder to nourish it. What was he going to do? The top of Bihu Peak was facing a formation eye of the Great Formation of Aoyama. A gap was suddenly opened in the formation eye. The wind in midsummer poured in, getting stronger and stronger. Raindrops fell down, followed by the faint sound of thunder. A thunderstorm was falling in the outside world at the moment. Jingjiu stood in the middle of the hall with his eyes closed, holding the new piece of Thunder Soul Wood in his hand, and started to summon the thunder. Countless thunder boomed in the sky. Crack! A bolt of lightning emerged from the gloomy and horrifying clouds, striking the palace on the top of Bihu Peak accurately. Soon after, more and more lightning bolts fell down, bombarding the hall incessantly and landing on Jingjiu's body. The most important part of the sword work of Aoyama was to cleanse the sword with the pure energy of heaven and earth in the thunderstorm. He was also cleansing the sword. The thunderstorm contained a great deal of energy. The lightning tore the space apart, making the energy of heaven and earth a bit chaotic. Under such circumstances, nobody could discover what was happening on the top of Bihu Peak, except for Yuan Qijing, who was watching from the Shangda Peak. Just like the year when Jingjiu first came to Bihu Peak to look for the white ghost, Yuan Qijing and Lu Ci also looked at him in the same way. If the white ghost really wanted to kill him, they would naturally do it. The thunderstorm was still going on, and countless bolts of lightning lit up the peak. The wind was raging on the top of Bihu Peak, and huge waves were set off on the lake, crashing onto the silver beach. Some bolts of lightning fell into the lake, blasting a hole in the water, and were swallowed up by the lake water after a while. At this moment, the blue lake looked like a raging ocean. There were holes everywhere. After a long time, the lightning finally stopped, and so did the rain. Jingjiu walked out, his white clothes hanging on his body in tatters, and his missing earlobes were a bit burnt. His body was surrounded by blue lightning, making crackling sounds. At this moment, he looked very disheveled, but also very scary, as if there was an extremely horrifying energy hidden in his body. The wild cats did not dare to approach the palace, and hid under the leaves. Their bodies were soaked by the rain, and their fur drooped, looking as disheveled as Jingjiu. But there was no sympathy in their eyes when they looked at him, only awe. Jingjiu walked into the lake, taking a real bath for the first time in many years. His tattered white clothes were washed away by the lake water, and the excessive and harmful energy of the thunderstorm also gradually dispersed. The sea-like lake water gradually broke, and Jingjiu walked out, taking out the white clothes he had prepared and putting them on. Zhao Liu and Zhuoruzhui were in closed-door training, trying to break through the upper state of the free travel. Jingjiu also broke through. He broke through the sea. End of this chapter. Chapter 519. By the time Jingjiu returned to the Shenhua Peak, the white cat had already woken up. He couldn't continue his nap after the commotion on Bihu Peak. It was his responsibility to guard the Thunder Soul Wood, and Lu Ci couldn't replace him. He felt relieved after making sure that Jingjiu didn't take the Thunder Soul Wood with him. As the cat woke up, the others would wake up as well. It was the same on the Nine Peak. As Jingjiu was thinking of this, he reached out his finger to leave a letter for Zhao Liu on the cliff, and then left on his sword. The sword landed outside Cloudy Town. The restaurant in Cloudy Town was closed early again, because of the pot of white soup in the private room. The horse-drawn carriage of the Gu clan stopped in front of the restaurant. It had been for that one person for many years. The wheels of the carriage rolled over the green stone pavement, giving off a faint sound. Leaning against the cushion, Jingjiu held the first child's sword and looked at the scenery passing by outside the window, lost in thought. The white cat crawled out from his sleeve and lifted his head to sniff. After making sure that Jingjiu had the smell of another cat, he rubbed against Jingjiu casually. As he rubbed against Jingjiu, he sensed that Jingjiu's cultivation state had improved significantly, so he rubbed against him earnestly. He regretted being deceived by Jingjiu in the state of inherited will back then. He should have eaten Jingjiu when he was still weak, and he didn't even have to drink the lake water. Jingjiu knew what was on his mind. He reached out his hand and rubbed his head to comfort the cat. The white cat didn't evade his touch, but enjoyed it with his eyes closed. He suddenly saw the first child's sword in Jingjiu's chest, feeling startled. Did Jingjiu intend to temper Nan Chu's sword into his own? Why didn't he do it on Yunxing Peak instead of coming out? Didn't he worry that the sword of the universe would be jealous if he held it in his chest? The cat suddenly thought of a possibility. The expression in his eyes changed abruptly, and he meowed anxiously at Jingjiu. I've seen those crumpled papers in the Guoqing temple. You want Taipingzhenren to be reborn as a sword, which is why the turmoil of the West Ocean happened later. Why do you carry the first child sword with you like this? Do you intend to use it to lure the immortal out? Jingjiu uttered The white cat panicked and meowed a few times. I can only beat that bird at most, and with the addition of Xian Yinzi, I can't handle it. Jingjiu ignored it and continued to look at the scenery outside the window. Suddenly, the sound of cats meowing came from outside the window. It must have been a stray cat that heard Ah Da's mournful cries and thought that it was peaceful. That should be a female cat, Jingjiu thought. Elder Ah Da flew into a rage out of humiliation. He scratched his face, producing a streak of fiery light. The Platonist sect was located on the shore of Daybreak Lake, which was a large lake surrounded by the eastern ridge. There were countless mountains in Dongling. They looked the same at night. Without starlight, cultivators could easily get lost. Tonight, the clouds covered the stars, and the bonfire in a certain mountain was even more eye-catching. It was a dilapidated temple. The light from the bonfire shone through the broken windows and doors. From time to time, the sound of something tearing through the air could be heard as cultivators landed one after another. They walked into the temple and greeted each other. Of course, they had to first introduce themselves. Taoist Chu of the Three Purities sect. I, Gon of the Longhu Mountain. He Chi of the Mysterious Heaven sect. Wu Buji of the Purple Sky sect. Those who appeared in the temple that night were the representatives of the small sects and the free-traveling cultivators who were going to participate in the Clean Heart meeting. They needed to exchange information on such occasions and learn more about the current situation in the cultivation circle. The bonfire in the temple on the barren mountain was the signal to gather. A person was sitting in a corner of the temple. He wore a conical hat, his sleeves quivering slightly. It was unclear what his hands were doing inside. Someone said, I thought that the Clean Heart meeting this year would be postponed. Everybody was aware that the purpose of the Platonist sect's Clean Heart meeting was to invite the colleagues in the cultivation circle to appreciate the famous bells and celebrate the birthday of the Grandmaster in name only. In fact, it had an ulterior motive. The whole of Chaotian was waiting for the spring rain, and nobody dared act recklessly before it happened. Even the Zhongzhou school had closed its mountain. But why did the Grandmaster insist on holding the meeting as scheduled? It's obvious that the matriarch wants to settle this matter while no one dares to make a move. Wu Buji of the Zihao sect said, Cloud Dream Mountain has closed its mountain, and it's said that the swordsmen of the Aoyama sect are all behind closed doors. Who would care about the affairs of the Platonist sect? The person in front asked, "What is the attitude of the Aoyama sect?" Wu Buji said, "The Aoyama sect will send someone there, but it's an internal affair of the Platonist sect. Even if the Grandmaster is a bit confused, she can't say anything about it. The Aoyama sect has always supported the sect Master Chin. Will they let her have a mishap? As the leader of the Orthodox sects, it's not appropriate for them to meddle in the affairs of other sections. It's ridiculous. If they can't even meddle in the affairs of other sects, they can't be considered as the leader of the Orthodox sections. What you said might be reasonable, but the Aoyama sect is in a special situation right now. I'm afraid that they will wait and see what happens." At this moment, the sound of footsteps came from outside the temple. The group of cultivators was a bit surprised. They wondered if there were any ordinary people in such a remote mountain. The people who walked into the temple were the old and young monks who had met Jingjiu several times before. The old monk was getting older, and his wrinkles were getting deeper. It seemed that he had suffered a lot in the snowfield over the years. The young monk was no longer young, and his expression was much calmer. It seemed that he no longer needed to practice the vow of silence. The group of cultivators looked at the medicine boxes behind them and guessed that they were the doctor monks of the Guoqing temple. They quickly stood up and bowed, giving up their seats by the bonfire. The two monks declined and went to a corner to rest. For some reason, the run-down temple became much quieter. The bonfire was blown by the night wind, making a whistling sound. The lone cultivator with the surname gone from the Longhu mountain suddenly stood up. He laughed at himself and said, "It seems that I won't participate in this pure heart meeting." After saying this, he actually really left. The run-down temple was still quiet. The cultivators knew why the lone cultivator with the surname gone left, and they also felt a bit uneasy. In the past countless years, as long as something big happened in the cultivation world, the Guoqing temple would send monks to treat the wounded and save people. This had happened so many times that it gradually formed a pattern in the minds of cultivators. As long as the monks of the Guoqing temple were not needed, it meant that something big was about to happen when they saw the monks of the Guoqing temple in an occasion that did not require the appearance of the Guoqing temple. Even the monks of the Guoqing temple had gradually become an ominous symbol in the hearts of some cultivators. The Grand Mistress of the Platonist sect had never liked monks. The Guoqing temple would never be invited to the Pure Heart meeting, and the monks of the Guoqing temple listened to the bell and Buddhist scriptures. They did not need the bell to clear their minds. So why did these two monks want to participate in the Pure Heart meeting? Naturally, there was only one explanation. The Guoqing temple felt that something bad would happen at the Pure Heart meeting this time. The cultivators all respected the monks of the Guoqing temple, but none of them wanted to be treated by them, let alone be released from purgatory. No matter how good the bell at the Pure Heart meeting was, no matter how cheap the price was, it was not worth it. That was why the lone cultivator with the surname gone left with a bitter smile. Thinking of this possibility, the crowd felt helpless. They decided to keep a low profile at the Pure Heart meeting. If something went wrong, they must hide as far away as possible. Of course, the crowd was not interested in discussing the Platonist sect anymore. They talked about the matter that the cultivation world was most concerned about. If that matter really comes to an end in a few years, who will take over the position of the sect master of the Aoyama sect? It will definitely be the Sword Justice. Hearing this answer, most of the cultivators nodded, thinking it was natural. At that time, the Aoyama sect would have only one figure in the heavenly arrival state, Yuan Qijing. He had the highest seniority and the most power, so he would definitely be the best candidate to be the sect master. Wu Buji had a different opinion, saying, "The position of the Sword Justice of the Aoyama sect is very important. If the great Grandmaster takes over the position, who will be the Sword Justice? The most important thing is that Tianguang Peak and Shanghai Peak have been in confrontation for many years. The disciples of the immortal Lu Ci are definitely not willing to accept the great Grandmaster as the sect master. The young disciples of Liangwang Peak are very aggressive. If they really make trouble, even if nothing serious happens, it will not look good. Besides, the great Grandmaster is in the late autumn of his life. I'm afraid that he is trying hard to find a way to free himself from this, so he is not interested in being the sect master. Someone thought it was reasonable and said worriedly, "But who else can convince the public except the Sword Justice?" Wu Buji said, "You didn't witness the Battle of the West Ocean. The peak master of Shuriyue, Guangyuan Junren, killed an elder of the West Ocean in the Broken Sea State instantly, and blocked the peak master of Yamatsai, Buqiuxiao, with one sword. It is said that he has reached the upper limit of the Broken Sea State and has a chance to break through the Heavenly Arrival State. I think he should be the one." Someone said, "According to the cultivation state, Fang Jingtian, the peak master of Shilai Peak, is also in the upper limit of the Broken Sea State and has a chance to break through the Heavenly Arrival State. It is said that he is cultivating behind closed doors. And he didn't go to the Battle of the West Ocean, but was in charge of guarding Aoyama. This shows how much trust and reliance the immortal Lu Ci has on him. Maybe his name will be in the will." These cultivation practitioners had no idea that Fang Jingtian had been locked up in the Hermit Peaks by Yuan Qijing and couldn't come out until he reached the Heavenly Arrival State. Someone said, "The sword comes from Aoyama, and Yunqing Peak is the sword peak. Does it mean that the peak master, Fu Wang, has no chance?" Who would be the next sect master of Aoyama was the most important matter for all of Chaotian. Compared to this matter, everything else was trivial. The discussions were quite heated, and their words were full of concern and worry. The cultivation practitioners were truly concerned and worried about this matter. It was because nobody wanted to see the Aoyama sect suffer a mishap. If Aoyama was in chaos, what would happen to the world? The conical hat was illuminated by the fire. That person listened to the discussions in silence, neither lifting his head nor uttering a single word. Well, no matter who takes over the position of the sect master of Aoyama, it's impossible for him to be like the immortal Lu Ci, who could illuminate the world with his sword and scare off all living beings. The discussions suddenly stopped because of this sentimental remark. An indescribable atmosphere filled the ruined temple. It was true that the spring rain would come eventually. The Zhongzhou school had been closed off for 3 years, which meant that there was still 1 more year left. The cultivation practitioners in the temple were from the small sects or free-traveling practitioners, so they were no match for a powerful sect like the Aoyama sect, and they couldn't reach it. Yet, thinking that the figure in the Heavenly Arrival State would leave, they couldn't help but feel a bit disappointed. Because of this disappointment, the people left one after another before the morning sun rose. The person with the conical hat got up and walked to the front of the 2 monks, asking, "Who do you think is better to be the sect master of Aoyama?" End of this chapter. Chapter 520. The old monk looked at him with a gentle smile and shook his head, indicating that he didn't know the answer, or that he didn't understand why he asked such a question. The young monk looked more mature than before, but he still had a temper. "What do you mean, Your Excellency?" he asked unhappily. When those cultivation practitioners were discussing earlier, they only talked about who had a higher chance of becoming the sect master of Aoyama, but they didn't express their own thoughts. This wasn't a matter that everyone was qualified to express their opinions on. The young monk felt that the other party's question was obviously malicious. "I'm just asking." Jingjiu took off his conical hat and sat down in front of the 2 monks. The young monk was surprised to see Jingjiu, and said happily, "Immortal Master Jingjiu, it's you. Why are you here? We meet again." Jingjiu asked, "You don't practice the vow of silence anymore?" The young monk felt a bit embarrassed, scratching his head. The old monk laughed, saying, When you went to the temple that year, I was still in the north. After I came back, I heard from my disciple. As he was talking, he suddenly coughed, and the wrinkles on his face deepened, as if he was in great pain. The young monk explained hurriedly that his master had suffered an internal injury in the snowland, which was difficult to cure. Jingju looked over and found that the old monk's meridians had been invaded by the coldness, and they were a bit withered. There was indeed no good way to cure them, except to recuperate for a while. The young monk was talking about the coldness in White Town, the ugliness of the monsters in the Snowy Kingdom, and the mysteriousness of the Broadsword King, when he suddenly covered his mouth with his hand. Jingju thought that the old monk didn't ask him to shut up today. The young monk covered his mouth with his hand and mumbled a few times, insisting that he wouldn't speak. The old monk coughed with a smile and said, "After the West Ocean incident, the temple didn't allow us to have any contact with the disciples of Aoyama. Jingju knew that it was because Lu Ci had released Tai Pingzhenren, and Zen Master wouldn't let it go so easily. He said to the young monk, "I'm not an ordinary disciple of Aoyama. I'm a disciple of Shinma Peak." The young monk thought it made sense. The relationship between the temple and Aoyama was ordinary. They were only close to Shinma Peak. He quickly put down his hand and said, "Immortal Master, what did you mean by asking that question just now?" Jingju said, "Living in this mountain, we don't know the true face. It's good to listen to the opinions of other sections." The young monk did not understand why a young disciple like him would care about the candidate of the sect leader. He shook his head and said, "I've never met any of those big shots. I don't know any of them. How would I know who's more suitable to be the sect leader of Aoyama?" Jingju thought to himself, "You may know a person's face but not his heart. Who else can say that they really know each other?" The young monk asked curiously, "Who do you support? Peak Lord Guangyuan Jinren or Fang Jingtian?" Jingju said, "We don't know each other, so of course we won't support him." The young monk did not understand his words and scratched his head in embarrassment. For some reason, Jingju had always liked this monk. He smiled and asked about his recent situation. This level of small talk was very rare for him. The young monk became spirited and told him about his travels with his master in the past few years, how he treated and saved people. Whether it was the local customs or strange illnesses, he told him everything. It could be said that he explained everything in detail. This was not recent situation, it was a memoir. Jingju listened to the chivalrous deeds and those who saved the dying. He did not feel annoyed, nor did he praise or ridicule. He did not respond to the conversation either. He only made a few noises occasionally. But it could be seen that he was listening very seriously. The old monk looked at this scene with a smile. The attitude that Jingju showed was the state that the monks of Guoqing Temple liked and pursued the most. The morning light finally fell on the peak. The bonfire had already turned into ashes. They were about to continue their journey. The young monk asked, "Immortal Master Jingju, are you also going to the Platonist sect?" Jingju said, "Yes, but I don't want to reveal my identity." The young monk looked at his face and said worriedly, "This is very difficult. Even with a bamboo hat, the Platonist sect won't let me in if I don't reveal my identity." Jingju said, "If there is a market in front, I want to buy 2 bamboo hats." The young monk did not understand, but the old monk did. He thought for a while and said, "Okay." There was a lake between the Dongling Mountains. There was a valley in the east. It welcomed the morning light every day, so it was called Dawn. Dawn Lake was not as strange as the blue lake of Aoyama, nor was it as vast as Ozawa's, but it had a picturesque scenery. The mountain wind blew the willow branches and gently touched the surface of the water, creating countless ripples. Many of the willow branches were tied with bells, giving off crisp sounds. The sounds mixed together didn't make people feel annoyed, but made them feel peaceful. The most famous magic item of the Platonist sect was the Clean Heart Bell. The clean heart bell could help the cultivation practitioners resist the evils and calm their mind. It was an important magic treasure, no matter when they were meditating or traveling spiritually. The effects of the clean heart bells of different states were quite different. As such, all the cultivation sects attached great importance to the Platonist sect. Because of the Auyama sect, the whole cultivation circle had been quiet for 2 years. The Clean Heart Meeting was the first significant event of the cultivation world. Many sects came to attend the meeting, except for the Zhongzhou school, the No Mercy sect and the destroyed Western Sea Sword school. Almost all the sects had come to attend the meeting. In addition to providing the clean heart bells of different states as usual, the Clean Heart Meeting was also held to celebrate the birthday of the Grandmaster. It was interesting that nobody knew how old she was, save for the Grandmaster herself. The cultivation circle only knew that the plum meeting hadn't started yet when she first appeared in the cultivation world. Both the Clean Heart Bell and the birthday of the Grandmaster were worthy of celebration, but the atmosphere by Dawn Lake was devoid of any celebration, and it was even a bit depressing. The cultivation practitioners of various sects understood the reason. They told their disciples not to walk around casually before the meeting, not even to go sightseeing by the lake. As the Grandmaster grew older, she became more and more worried about the future of the Platonist sect. She was worried that the current sect master, her daughter-in-law, the Madame Chen, would remarry after her death and give the Platonist sect to someone with a different surname. Many years ago, she had suggested that the Madame Chen marry a nephew of her husband's family, but her proposal was rejected without hesitation. Since then, the internal conflicts of the Platonist sect had become obvious. In order to ensure the continuation of the branch, the Grandmaster had used many methods. If it weren't for the support of the Auyama sect, the Madame Chen would have been abolished a long time ago. 3 monks wearing conical hats came to the shore of Dawn Lake. The disciple of the Platonist sect, who was in charge of receiving them, was experienced and knowledgeable. He knew they were from the Guoqing Temple at first glance. Feeling a bit uncomfortable, he had no choice but to let them in. The Guoqing Temple was highly respected by the cultivation practitioners of the Guoqing Temple. If people knew that the Platonist sect refused the masters of the Guoqing Temple outside the door, they would be criticized. The reason why this disciple of the Platonist sect felt uncomfortable was the same as the reason why the free-traveling practitioner in the ruined temple had left in advance. The Grandmaster would never invite the monks of the Guoqing Temple to participate in the Clean Heart Meeting. Did they come here by themselves because they were certain that something bad would happen at the Clean Heart Meeting? Nobody had expected that things would happen so fast, or that the table would be overturned so early. At the welcoming banquet that night, the white-haired Grandmaster stood on the main seat with the help of a middle-aged man. There was no sign of sect leader Chen or the young master of the Platonist sect, Sensei Da. The middle-aged man had a high cultivation base and a cold aura. In the eyes of the cultivators of the various sects, he was somewhat unfamiliar. The Grandmaster said indifferently, "Let me introduce everyone. This is my husband's nephew. His name is Yuanquan." Countless gazes fell on this middle-aged man called Yuanquan. Some people had already guessed that this was the Tao companion that the Grandmaster had chosen for sect leader Chen. After a moment of shock, people finally understood the Grandmaster's intentions and couldn't help but burst into an uproar. No matter how much the Grandmaster pressured sect leader Chen, the cultivation world had always thought that she wanted to kill her mother and pass on the position to her grandson. Looking at the scene today, could it be that she was preparing to pass on the position to this Yuanquan? Then what about sect leader Chen and Sensei Da? Was he imprisoned or was he already dead? No one spoke. The scene was deathly silent. Even if it was a tragedy of flesh and blood killing each other, it was still the internal affairs of the Platonist sect. It was evident that the Grandmaster had taken complete control of the Platonist sect, Others couldn't interfere, and dared not interfere. It was then that countless gazes left de Yuanquan and turned to a spot in the hall, as if they had a tacit understanding. That was the best spot in the hall. The people of the Aoyama sect were sitting in that spot. The leader was the elder of Shuriwe Peak, Hibyumu, followed by Lin Ingliang and other young disciples. Hibyumu usually planted the medicinal herbs and made magic pills in the peaks, and occasionally hosted the inherited sword competition. He wasn't famous in the cultivation world. Judging from his appearance and bearing, the crowd thought he was an honest and taciturn old man. What would the Aoyama sect say about this? Where is sect leader Chun? Hibyumu didn't show any emotion on his face, but his question was very straightforward. The Grand Master said expressionlessly, Chun fell ill a few days ago, so it's not convenient for her to meet the guests. If so, I'd like to pay her a visit, said Hibyumu. The Grand Master said nonchalantly, It's not convenient for a man and a woman to do that. This was very unyielding. Where is the young master? Asked Hibyumu. The Grand Master said, Sensei has to take care of her mother, so she has no time to meet the guests. Hibyumu stood up and said to the Grand Master, You should know that Shima Peak has only had 3 guests over the years, Tong Yen, Bai Zhao, and the young master. The Grand Master said expressionlessly, Elder He, if you have something to say, just say it. Nothing can happen to her, said Hibyumu. The Grand Master was still expressionless as she said, The young people like to play around, so it's normal for them to get hurt. Is Zhao Layer going to kill me because of this? After a moment of silence, Hibyumu looked at the middle-aged man named de Yuanquan and asked, Do you want to die? End of this chapter. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.